Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. If I could have your attention for a few moments, I have some announcements before we get started. You'll find a questionnaire on your seat. If you don't have one yet, just hold up your hand. There's a lovely young lady going around with some there. And if you'd like to and be a part of the Preferred Network, we'll keep you up to date on upcoming events. Also, on your way, please pick up a flyer of the next coming elections. There we go, good start. Anyways, we've got some other great speakers coming to town, and pick up the flyer on the way out. Also, David's books and videos are on sale at the back throughout the night, and I'm sure he'd be glad to sign them at the end of the evening if you like. Please tell all your friends David will be speaking in Vancouver and Victoria later this week, and you'll find the schedules posted at the exits, or ask one of our elves at the back there. There's quite a few of them. And finally, last but not least, I'd like to thank you all for coming out tonight, and I'd like to thank everyone for making tonight a wonderful success. Before I introduce David, I'm going to tell you just a little bit about myself, not too much. My name's Wes Mann from the Preferred Network, and it fills my heart with hope to see such a large number of people out tonight to break free from the slavery of imposed thought and behavior. In 1991, I came across some profound information that would send me on a course to change my life forever. I began to collect and distribute the information, and in an effort to raise people's awareness, I started to hold lectures and workshops throughout the province. I later added a line of high-tech health products to keep pace with the high-tech leading-edge information I was disseminating. Prior to 1991, before I woke up, so to speak, I was a fisherman, and it was during that time that I developed a keen ability for navigation. In fact, I enjoyed navigating so much that at the ripe old age of 20, I became captain of the ship. Strangely enough, my favorite wheel watch was from midnight to 2 a.m. when all was quiet and still and favorable for contemplation. But it was more than the peace and tranquility of the night watch that I enjoyed. I think there was something about navigating my way through the darkness into the light that was satisfying and rewarding. Of course, we had navigational aids like radar, lighthouses, and light beacons to help us find our way safely up and down the beautiful but rocky coast of British Columbia. As people came to know me, they would invariably ask, so what did you do before you embarked on this wild and crazy mission of yours? And of course I would tell them I used to be a fisherman. But in many ways you could say that I'm still a fisherman, only now I fish for truth bringers of truth, justice, and freedom. And I feel that David Icke is the ultimate catch, and I'm humbled and honored to have him aboard my ship. So tonight, as you listen to David speak, it is my hope that you will see him as a beacon of light, a navigational aid to help you find your way safely through the stormy seas of life. David is a world-renowned speaker and author of 9 books, and an extraordinary human being. Please help me welcome the one and only David Icke.
How's that? It's where it says on. Gives it away, really. I've never had an introduction like that before. I've had a few in the tabloid press of Britain, like, this guy's off his head. This guy's completely bonkers, but I never quite had one like that before. Very, very touching. But what I'm not is some kind of messiah appearing over the horizon. I'm just a guy who's woke up and would dearly love to see everyone else wake up. Because if we do, what I'm going to talk about this evening is all over. It's a house of cards. There's a lot of people think that some of the stuff that I'm going to talk about is negative, and on one level it is. It's horrible. But it only exists because 5 billion people have given their power away. We take it back, thank you, good night, all over. What should we do now? It started for me, I was a television presenter minding my own business in Britain, introducing the football and the stuff, doing no one any harm. And then the top of my head exploded in the public arena. Some people go through their spiritual awakening, in quiet little places away from nowhere. I had my spiritual awakening on prime time television. So for 2 years after 1991, I literally couldn't walk down any street in Britain without being laughed at by most of the people on it. I remember once I was walking through this town, I got so fed up with being laughed at that I got in my car to drive out of the place. I thought, I can't stand it anymore. Stopped at the lights, looked across, found me in the next car and laughing, And then I'd get home and I was a comedian's dream. And I had to mention my name to get a round of applause, I was on the Raw Variety Show once, in a David Frost. Remember him, David Frost? He said, I'm just going to announce, he said, there's going to be a remake of Postcard from the Edge, starring David Icke, All that went on for 2 years. And it was a nightmare, except that with hindsight, it was the making of it. For 2 reasons. First of all, when people are laughing at you at that scale, 2 things happen. Either you end up in the corner of some institution, or you step out of the prison that most people live in, the fear of what other people think of you. That's the fear that pressurizes and terrorizes most people into denying what they are, unique. The other thing that I realized at the time, which was so important for what I'm doing now, I realized how easy it is to get vast numbers of people to believe anything. Because those people were actually laughing at me, not for what I was actually saying overwhelmingly, but for what they read I was saying in the tabloid media, which was usually the opposite of what I was actually saying. You say to most people, even today in Britain, David Icke will say, oh yeah, he thinks he's Jesus, doesn't he? Yeah. I've written 9 books, saying, religion is one of the greatest forms of mind control ever invented. But I've discovered religion, according to loads of people in Britain, because they've read the tabloid papers. So what happened was that I kind of opened up to spiritual things, not religious, spiritual, and went around talking about it. Went around talking around universities. Talk about Christians to the lions, crikey. I spoke at one, it took 15 minutes for the noise to die down and for the glasses to stop arriving on the stage before I could start. These are the decision makers of tomorrow, gang, what a worry you like. And it was an amazing challenge to stand in your own power and not be intimidated. Then around 94, I guess, I started getting a trickle, then a flood, and now a tidal wave of 3-dimensional information, you might call it, names, dates, places, methods, goals, etc., of how a tiny few people control the world. And for a while I'm giving it, hold on, I've been through all this spiritual stuff here, and now what's the deal? And then I realized that actually one is a reflection of the other. What I find in this whole area of alternative thought and emerging information are kind of imbalances all over the place, which I feel we need to bring into balance if this house of cards is going to collapse. So often I find in the area of conspiracy research, people who are full of anger, full of frustration, can't see a way out of it, and really are projecting at the people they are opposing the same energy the people they're opposing are using to run the world. And they give tremendous power to this clique that runs the planet. Therefore, they feel powerless. It's going to bring it to an end, isn't it? And over here, so often, I find the spiritual arena as symbolized by aspects within the New Age movement who look at that and go, oh no, that's too negative, mustn't talk about that. They're kind of just below the ceiling. While you're up there, girl, can you just dust it? and my humble opinion, that is a form of escapism. Just like having a few beers. It's ignoring the realities of this three-dimensional world. And for me, we have not come into three-dimensional embodiment to then ignore we have done so. We have come into three-dimensional embodiment to make a difference and ground spiritual values in this world and make a difference in this world, not float above it thinking, oh no. Nor, I would humbly suggest, because what you kind of see, you see themes all the time. And one of the themes going right through history is we don't have to do anything. We just have to sacrifice now and just keep our heads down because someone or something is going to appear over the horizon or on a cloud from the sky to sort it for us. And there's also this theme that goes through history in various kind of areas of the few chosen people are going to be saved by this Saviour, whoever it is. And all happens is the name changes. So, for ages we've had the Christian version of this. I'm not having to go with Christianity, there are many versions of it. Which is basically, it's okay because Jesus is going to come and he's going to take the chosen ones and save them. Now, in 1997, we have the extraterrestrial version of that. Oh, Ashtar, save me! Have you seen that? Have you seen it? The Ashtar theme. I must have heard this somewhere before. There are chosen people who are going to be taken off the planet in spaceships as this geezer comes and saves the world. Excuse me, is it the same film or what? It's like a remake, isn't it? Again, it is a means of externalizing responsibility. We've chosen to come into this world not to escape from it, but to change it. Not some external entity, us. Multidimensional infinity, capable of anything, that has allowed itself to ignore that multidimensional infinity and in effect become a herd. It's strange. I put on there legalize happiness. I saw that in California once. I thought that's good. Legalize happiness. Because one of the things I notice is that so many people are not having a good time, are they? I've just come from Auckland in New Zealand and I was standing there waiting to get on this jumbo jet. And there's like hundreds of people waiting to get on this thing. And I'm looking up, and there's none of them having a good time. They're all fed up and wound up. Exactly. That's where they're meant to be. Because people who are in their own power, who are living in the moment and being what they are, they're a nightmare to manipulate. Nightmare. Where do you start? They don't know what they're going to do in the next minute, never mind what they're going to do next week. But you get people in there, depression, life's a sacrifice, yeah. Have you noticed that? It's another little theme, isn't it? Jam tomorrow. What is it the religions tell us? They tell us that if we sacrifice now, we'll have paradise tomorrow. And then we're told by politicians, if we have economic sacrifice now, we'll have economic prosperity tomorrow. It's a bit like sitting on one of those fairground roundabouts on a horse. It doesn't matter how fast you go, the jam is always the same distance in front of you. But if we accept that life's a sacrifice and that paradise is tomorrow, in whatever area we're talking about, we'll accept a load of crap here, which we wouldn't normally, because we're convinced here somewhere will be paradise. It's like the American Constitution has got this thing in it. The right for the pursuit of happiness. What a waste of time. If you're always in a state of mind of pursuing happiness, you're never happy because you're always pursuing the flipping thing. Happiness is always tomorrow, never now. And the basis of the manipulation I'm going to talk about is that over the centuries, knowledge, not just in the modern world, knowledge has been held, significant knowledge, has been held at the top of the pyramid, while the people have been kept in ignorance of that knowledge. You can't control 5 billion people physically. I mean, you try to control a herd of sheep physically. You need 3 or 4 guys for every sheep, and even then they're not guaranteed to get it. You do it through the mind of the herd and the emotions of the herd. And what you do with the human race is turn that into a herd, not least by the suppression of knowledge. The nature of this knowledge, some of the detailed parts of it, has changed over the years, obviously. A long, long time ago, they had knowledge of what the world really looked like that was kept out of the public domain, to the point where Columbus certainly wasn't looking for India when he found the Americas. They knew it was there. Actually, I think the Native Americans probably already knew, actually, myself. Today, there's fantastic technology held outside the public arena, which we're not allowed to see. We are kidded that the space shuttle is the state-of-the-art human technology. So when something's flying in the sky and we think that must be from another planet, we don't make things like that. I think, for me, we're never going to really understand what some of these things are until we realize what the real state-of-the-art of human technology is, because according to people that I trust that have kind of worked in these areas, it's 30, 40, 50 years and more in the secret development phases ahead of what we see in the public arena. But the suppression of knowledge that has gone and spanned this entire period of known human history and before, right up into the present day, the suppression of knowledge which has been the foundation of human control, has been the suppression of knowledge of who we really are, the nature of life itself. If we can be sold one of 2 lines, either there is a judgmental God who judges us on one life on earth lasting a few seconds or 100 years, and then either we go to paradise or grab the shovel. Or, as science tries to tell us, we come from oblivion, we are out of oblivion for a few seconds or 100 years or so, and then we go back to oblivion, summed up by the phrase, life's a bitch and then you die. We buy one of those 2 things. We buy many similarities. Now, people think that religion and science are actually opposites. I call them opposames. The same basic approach and foundations with a different dress on and a different name on the door. For instance, both of those versions of reality only survive by the suppression of knowledge. Knowledge was allowed into the public arena that is being suppressed, that is being ridiculed or dismissed by reflex action. They could not survive that. Indeed, life's a bitch and then you die science is already under increasing pressure. And there's many other, but one other particularly opposite between these 2 apparent opposites. And that's that both are saying someone or something else is in control of our lives. Either a judgmental God, always a fella, or random accidents. And the idea is to get us, I'll come to this more when I go into the spiritual side of this, is to get us to externalize our power. The power to control our lives is within us, as I'll come to later. But if we can externalize that power by, when something happens in our lives we don't like, we go, not, what does this say about me? But, right, who's to blame? Who wants it? If we say, and we do all the time, when something goes wrong in the world, not what am I going to do about this, but what are they going to do about this? We're giving our power away to a tiny, tiny clique all the time. The power used to control the planet by a literal handful of people is the power the human race gives away day after day. That's all it is. And when we do that, there are consequences. When we do it on an individual level, we give control of our destiny away to somebody else. When we do it collectively, we give the world away. And as we'll see as we go through the evening, we have given the world away to some seriously imbalanced people. So what I'm going to do is first of all look at how it's done. Then go through some 3D names, dates, places, stuff, of people involved and all that stuff. Then I'm going to look at the spiritual way out of this. And by spiritual, I don't mean religious. Religion and spirituality, for me, are so often opposites. Religion, in its empire-building, rules and regulations form. And it doesn't matter almost whichever one you choose, they are opposates. They are the manipulation of fear and guilt to impose a belief system. Spirituality is setting the spirit free and saying, I am unique. That's my God-given gift, and I am going to express it. That's a manipulator's party trick. That's a manipulator's marketing. And then after we've had a break, we'll take questions, but I also want to immediately after the break talk about some specific mind control stuff and some very, very famous people involved in it, including people in Canada. So, how's it done? How can a few people control billions? Because we have become a herd. If you think about it, you watch a herd of sheep, and they follow the one in front when one of them starts to move. Most of them do, don't they? Bar, 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 follow yesterday, follow tomorrow, follow next week. Every time his feet move, mine do. It's brilliant. And you stand there and say, oh, look at that, you know. And then you've got the stragglers who won't immediately, and there are always a very, very few of them, who won't immediately submit to what I call the bar mentality. And then the old sheepdog comes in, symbolic of fear. And then they're in line, aren't they? All right, they go quietly. And you stand there watching this, you say, hey, Ethel, come and have a look at this. Look at them sheep, and they're funny. They're chasing that. They're always chasing that one. Except when you kind of look at the human race, we've actually outdone the herd of sheep. Because we have dispensed with the flipping sheepdog. We have. We police each other, we do. We don't need to call the sheepdog in, we're doing it ourselves. When people are saying, right, you know, I don't buy all this stuff I'm being told to believe. But I think like this, and I like to do this with my life, and all this stuff. You go through this, oh yeah, but what are the consequences of doing that? Fear of what other people think of us. And who is it that's frightening us? That we're concerned about the reaction of if we express uniqueness instead of going with the herd. It's not Bill Clinton or Chrétien. But you pronounce it. I was close. I'm from England. You'll have to spare it. But it's not those people in positions of apparent power that we're frightened of the reaction of. It's people like our mother. What will your mother say? What about the neighbours? Oh my God. What about the guys down the bar and the people at work? What will they say if I express my uniqueness and am, oh my God, call the police, different from the norm? In other words, we are frightened as human sheep of getting out of the herd because we're frightened of all the other sheep that are submitting to the herd. We're policing each other. It's like having a cell full of prisoners, and whenever one of the prisoners finds a means of escape, you don't need prison warders because all the other prisoners got to block the exit. You can't get out of here, I'm in here, not there. So in short, all you need to do to set the foundation to control 5 billion people is to set the norms in society. What is acceptable thought and behaviour before you meet resistance, ridicule or condemnation for the crime of being different. And if you can set those norms, the vast majority of humans are going to go in there anyway through the bar mentality. Well, he's got letters after his name, our Dave, he must know what he's doing. And the others, or the vast majority of others who suss that's a nonsense, they'll go in there because they're terrified of the consequence of being different in a world of uniformity. Set those norms, you got them. If, and this is the point, if multidimensional infinity gives its power away. It's interesting, ignorance. It's amazing how many times you see a word, and when you look at how it's made up, it fundamentally explains the situation. The word ignorance is overwhelmingly made up of the word ignore. The human race is ignorant because it chooses to ignore so much information that's available if it would choose to look for it. It's a choice. Like everything's a choice. So how are these norms set? Well, all you've got to do is control the education. Oh, I said education. Wash my bloody mouth out. All you've got to do is control the indoctrination system in the schools and universities, and the mantra messages through the media, and the peer pressure and intergenerational pressure to conform to what the previous generations of peers have been conditioned to believe. And basically, you cracked it. Let's look at education. I was just come back from Australia. Around Australia, I spoke in 3 kind of university lecture theatres. And I stood there like, and there's big bank of seats. And they've all got little desks in front of them to write on, students like. And I thought, I'm looking at the indoctrination system in front of my eyes. Because what happens, it works like this. Every day in those university lecture theatres, onto the front comes a professor of something or other. Now, he has become a professor because he spent his career telling the system what it wanted to hear and accepting the system's version of reality, because if he hadn't have told the system what it wanted to hear, he would not have passed his exams to become a professor. Very straightforward. The professor then comes on and tells the next generation of young people what they have to believe and what they have to tell the exam paper if they are going to progress within the system. And if they don't tell the exam paper what it wants to hear, even though what they may be saying is completely true and what the exam paper wants to hear is total tosh, they won't pass. It's like a self-perpetuating free energy machine, this education system. And no one's more prisoners of it than some of the people, the teachers and staff, who have opened their minds. The frustration must be enormous trying to work within this thing. Because the norms have been set, and the structure has been set, and then it runs itself. And if you don't conform with the structure, you don't progress within the system. Then you once you condition one generation to take on a certain view of reality, it will, not through malevolence, but through thinking it's right and wrong, moral, immoral, all this stuff, pass it on to the next generation. so many things survive into the modern world as reality and acceptable merely because no one has actually said, excuse me, over here, why do we do this? It's a killing word. Why? Because you say, well, I don't know. I love this one. Why is it that people who work in offices and professional jobs, why do they go to work in a suit and a tie? I say to them, why do you do that? Then they say, I don't know. I said, who decided that you should go to work in a suit and a tie? Way back there. When was it? Well, I don't know. No one can tell me. And why a tie? Well, everyone does it. So everyone does it. Just because everyone does it. I was talking in Cardiff, the capital of Wales once, about 3 years ago. And this guy puts his hand up here with the questions, and he says, he's dressed as a Native American. He hasn't got the headdress on, but he's got the rest. And he says, I may not look it, he said, but I'm quite high up in Cardiff Council. He said, what happened, he said, a year before, he said he's driving to work and he's sitting in this traffic jam. Because you know how successful someone is in the world today by the size of the traffic jam they're stuck in on the way to work, don't you? I mean, they go in and out of London every day and they get stuck in the same place. I used to work for breakfast television. And we used to do very early morning programs because it was breakfast television. That gives it away, doesn't it? So I used to be coming home out of London against the traffic when all the commuters were coming in. It was incredible. The traffic jams are all in the same place at the same time every morning. They're sitting there. Ever so successful. And they go to work, and they get there, and they're really stressed because they've been in a jam all morning, and they're having a really nightmare time. And then they get in the car at night, and they drive back home, and they're having another nightmare time. And they get home late, and they're tired, and they have to go out with the wife, and left up, and they go to bed. And they get up in the morning, starts again. Well, they're ever successful. They're ever so successful. There's something in the city. Yes, a brat. You see in Japan they have people dressed in uniforms pushing commuters onto them trains. Have you seen that? You know someone who's successful in Japan because they're walking down the street like this. Been stuck in the train like that all morning, against the wall, against the window. Oh, jeez. I'm sure I've got this vision, of Martians going down the bar of a night. The opening line would be nice. Have you heard the latest about the Earthlings? And they're giving it. No, they'd never do that. They would. Anyway, this guy's in this traffic jam this morning in Cardiff, and he's thinking, why do I go to work in a shirt and a tie? Am I any better at my job? No. So why do I do it? Because everyone else does it. Or would I really like to go to work? I'd like to go to work dressed as a Native American. That's what he did. Turns up. I think he got away with it because he didn't actually interact with the public. He's in an office, Cardiff Council. Turns up dressed as an Indian. And of course his mates think he's gone completely doolally, this guy. But he stuck at it. And he said a year later, he said they ended it. He says, because I'm being them and they daren't be themselves. But I'm being me. And this passing on across the generations of things that only exist because no one asks why is a colossal perpetuator of narcissism and control. You know, we have Roman Catholic priests who are celibate in the Roman Catholic Church today, 1997, because of what a Pope decided in 1074. What if this guy is wrong? It's possible. Imagine, you leave your body, you disincarnate to another time-space dimension, and you get there, and you're still in earth mode, Roman Catholic priest-like, so you've still got your legs crossed. And standing next to you is this spirit figure with a hat on. And you're standing there and you're going, oh, I had a hard incarnation of me. I was a Roman Catholic priest. I had to be celibate all my bloody life. And this guy says, yeah, I was the Pope that decided that. What a killer. I mean, you'd give him a slapping, wouldn't you? But we accept these things. Just finally on this subject of Gaia, lady in Houston, 1993, said to me, got a great story, she said, sums up what you're saying. She said, when I first got married, she said, I was in the kitchen and I was cutting this corners off this ham, put it in the pan, put it in the oven, you know. He said, my husband came through the kitchen and said, why do you do that? Why do you cut the corners off the ham every time we have ham? She said, I don't know, my mother used to do it. What's your mother? He said, well, why do your mother cut the corners off the ham? She said, I don't know, what's your mother? He said, call your mother. Ask her why she cut the corners off the ham. So she calls her mother, hello, Mum, you know when I was a girl and you used to cut the corners off the ham? Why did you do that? And her mother said, because my pan was never big enough, dear. Now, unless this husband, thank goodness, had said, why do you do that? She'd still be cutting the corners off the ham, and in the next generation, our children still be doing the same. So, if you can set the limits of the hassle-free zone, as I call it, acceptable thought behavior, you trap the vast majority of the human race into your very narrow version of reality and behavior and view, because of the barbar mentality overwhelmingly, and of the fear mentality which that's what the deaf express the fact that they have. Not only that, you stitch up the global media. Because people, when people like me say the media are being used to manipulate and mind control and emotionally scramble the human race, that we must be saying that there's a manipulator in every newsroom saying, this is what you're going to write, don't write that. No need. Couldn't work like that anyway. But we've got an old saying in Britain which goes like this. You cannot bribe or twist the great British journalist, but seeing what they will do unbribed, there's no reason to. Because, having been a journalist for years, there is no more uninformed, manipulated profession on planet Earth than journalists. Because they're being bombarded by the official version of events all the time, and it sticks. And what does the media take as its point of reference by which it judges everything in terms of credibility, non-credibility, sane, insane, whatever? It takes as its reference point whatever the norms in society are. So, anyone operating outside the hassle-free zone in terms of their lifestyle or view is immediately, if they're in the public eye, ridiculed or condemned by the media around the world, because that's the reference point they're taking for credibility, non-credibility, right, wrong, good, bad, and all that stuff. Which is why, whatever country I go in, when I talk to people in the spiritual area or in the conspiracy area, they all say exactly the same about how their media treats them. Because the reference point is increasingly the same as we span the world with the same culture. It's actually my ambition before I leave this United States to enter some city somewhere in the world and not see a British McDonald's. That's my great ambition. I haven't cheated. I'm sure there are people somewhere in Canada and somewhere in Australia and somewhere in Britain that can make burgers without having them done by an American transnational corporation. I'm sure we can manage that. Anyway, the media takes as its reference point, therefore it judges the world from the point of the hassle-free zone. A few centuries ago, if we'd have had today's media, indeed it happened anyway, those who said the earth was round at that point were outside the hassle-free zone because it had decided at that point the reality was the earth is flat, Jerusalem's the centre of the universe. So people out here for saying the earth was a sphere were ridiculed and condemned. They were credible for saying it was flat. When the evidence became overwhelming that indeed the Earth was a sphere, the hassle-free zone's version of reality flipped, and we had musical chairs. Those who said it was flat were now out here, and they've been ridiculed ever since for saying it, and those who said it was a sphere are now in here and have great credibility. So, in short, and this is so important as the foundation for this, if you can set the norms in society, you not only create a mental and emotional sheep pen for the vast majority of the human race because we ignore and give our power away, you also set the parameters from which the media reports the world. And then what you do is you break the herd up and play off against each other so there's constant conflict. You create retirement homes for the mind, called religions, political parties, economic theories, and then you play them off against each other. It's kind of interesting, how you get the same theme with so many things that are set up to grab people's belief system. The Jehovah's Witnesses were set up by a guy called Charles Taze Russell, high-degree Freemason. The Mormons were set up by Brigham Young and Joseph Smith, high-degree Freemasons from the New York Lodge. The Ku Klux Klan, which has created tremendous fear, the four-letter word that controls the world, in the black community and conflict and stuff over the last, goodness knows how many years into the last century, was set up by a Freemasonic god in America called Albert Pike. And so if you create areas of belief systems and you play them off against each other because they're so self-righteous, you actually get the herd at war with itself. And above all that, there's a few people going, a bit more there, thank you very much, thank you, thank you. And it's this self-righteousness, I guess, that's at the heart of it. Not allowing someone else to write something different, because we've got the answers, you must believe it. So once this hassle-free zone is set, then you start the mind manipulation techniques, because this is a coup d'etat on the mind and the emotions, which are specifically aimed to get certain reactions. The most powerful of them, and the most used, it's used on us all the time, but once you kind of realize how it works, you never watch a news bulletin the same again, or in the White House state, you can see it so clear. It's, I call it anyway, problem, reaction, solution. This is a crack at this one. You create a problem in the world. It might be a terrorist bomb. It could be a run on a currency. At its most extreme, it could be a war. You then make sure someone else is blamed for it in the public mind, not you. You then go to stage 2 of this technique, and you get the media to report your manufactured event in the way you want it reported. And that's not difficult, because if you listen to a news bulletin and you listen to what the reporters are actually saying, 99% of the time, they're taking the official version of events, putting it in their own words and calling it reporting. You get things like, FBI sources said today this was responsible, or that's where they're looking. The White House said they feel there might be a so-and-so connection to this, and etc., etc. So you wind up public opinion in relation to your problem to the point where public opinion says what we hear all the time about events, this can't go on, something must be done, what are they going to do about it? And then comes the sting, where those who created the problem got that reaction, then openly, in political statements and in newspapers of the world, offer the solutions to the problems they have themselves created. And what happens in this technique is that you not only avoid vast amounts of opposition to what you would get anyway if you'd done it straight on the line, you actually get vast amounts of people to demand you do it. Someone comes along and says, got this great idea. We're going to have more cameras all over the roads. We're going to have cameras in the streets, cameras in the city centres, cameras in the housing estates, what's happening in Britain and increasingly around the world. We're going to have more authoritarian laws. We're going to erode basic freedoms and give more powers to police and security agencies. We'd say, if it was done straight on like that, we'd say, excuse me, little word. That's a fascist state you're proposing. We're not having that. You let society break down so there is more crime. You emphasize crime in other areas to be worse than it really is. You get people in that four-letter word fear of being mugged, fear of having their house broken into, fear. And not only will they not oppose that little package, they will demand you introduce it. It's happening all over the world. I've travelled a lot of countries in the last year, all over the world, and two things have hit me. One is that the same problems are being orchestrated in every one of them. The same solutions are being offered, and, hallelujah, brother and sister, there is definitely a global spiritual awakening going on, which is going to bring this thing to an end. So problem reaction solution is an immensely powerful and constantly used technique. The Oklahoma bomb is a classic. The trials just started in Denver of a guy called Timothy McVeigh. This has every single element of problem reaction solution. First, you had the problem. 168 people killed in the Murrah building in Oklahoma in April 1995, April the 19th, 1995. Many of them children. You then get, understandably, the public reaction. Something must be done. What are they going to do about it? Within 24 hours, Bill Clinton was orchestrating the solution. He called for, quote, an easing of restrictions on the military's involvement in domestic law enforcement. 2 anti-terrorism bills have gone through Congress, giving more and more powers to security agencies and police, phone tapping, stop and search, all this stuff, and taking away basic freedoms without a murmur, hardly, of complaint. Purely on the back of an explosion in the Murrah building. Something must be done. And what happens is that within the first 24 hours, the media around the world, with a major event like this, has set the story in concrete. You go around the world and ask people about the Waco siege, ask them about Oklahoma, and they'll give you 99% of the time the version of events that was reported around the world within 24 hours of that event happening. Because as the true story starts to emerge and big questions start to emerge, suddenly the mainstream media that did that within 24 hours set in concrete doesn't want to know. What we're not being told, the alternative media in America particularly is reporting, is that explosive experts writing in the alternative media and being interviewed in those magazines and stuff and radio stations, including a guy called Ben Partin, a former brigadier general, spent a long time in the military in explosives. They're pointing out that not only is the government's explanation of Oklahoma not true, it is utterly, utterly impossible. The first announcement through the media from the government was that that building was demolished virtually by a 1,000-pound fuel fertilizer device put together by a couple of guys in a barn. As these explosives people are pointing out, a 1,000-pound fuel fertilizer device will hardly blow the flipping windows out. By press release, it's amazing what you can do with a press release. By press release, that has now reached 4,800 pounds, as the creditability gap has been identified. The Ryder truck, I'm sure, is soon to become an articulated truck. They're also pointing out a little problem with physics. There was the bomb that was supposed to cause it. There is a massive pillar that was not demolished by the bomb, with an explosion going that way. And here behind it is another massive pillar that was completely demolished. Don't know if you've dabbled in physics, Mike. What these explosive experts are pointing out is the only explanation for this is the device was on that pillar and other pillars. Another interesting thing, the official explanation within 24 hours was that it was a reprisal by far-right mad conspiracy theorists against the Waco siege 2 years earlier, April the 19th, 1993. And the target was something called the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco and Firearms. It's an agency of the United States Treasury, of which apparently they have 3 treasuries in the United States. A lot of people know that, including me, so about 3 years ago. It's funny then that the parents of some of the children who died in Oklahoma, who didn't buy the line after a while, there's too many holes in it, they started doing some investigations. And they've established that there was not one member of the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco and Firearms in that building when the explosion went off. Nor one child from any of those people in the nursery. But they were in full combat here around an hour or so before outside the building. A grand juror called Hoppy Heidelberg was put onto the grand jury to investigate this Oklahoma bombing. And he was a bright man. And he started asking very simple questions, which the government did not, or the hidden hand that controlled the government, more to the point, didn't want question. They sacked him off the jury. So problem reaction solution is a colossally important and effective tool. And the way round it, or one way round it for me, is a very simple question. Who benefits? There was a playwright, Roman playwright, or he was old anyway, called Seneca. Seneca, I don't know, sounds like a liver sulfur. Oh, wow, I must have some Seneca. And he said something very, very true. He said, he who most benefits from a crime is the one most likely to have committed it. And if you ask the word, when we're being given the official version of an event, or what have you, it's who benefits from me believing this version of events? And when you ask that question, it's amazing how you turn away from who they're blaming to actually who the blamers are. Because who benefited from Oklahoma? Nobody, except those who wish to increase the powers of security agencies and take away basic freedoms of America. Who benefits from people who go crazy with guns? Anyone who wants to take arms out of the general population. And the people who go crazy with guns are not who they seem, as I'll come to when I talk about the second half of the mind control part of this. The goal, the structure this group of people are looking for, are looking to create by these methods and others, is this one. A world government at the top which would control all the major decisions taken in the world. They would control a world central bank, a world currency, and a world army, with nation-state armies dismantled under the guise of peace. Under that monumental structure would come 3 superstates. The European Union, and in Europe we are virtually there now. We are one decision away from having a single currency and a single bank in Europe. And that bank would be controlled by 6 unelected bankers with an 8-year guaranteed period of tenure. And it's actually in the Maastricht Treaty, which we've already signed, that the decisions of these bankers would not be able to be influenced or overruled by any other area of the Union, including the elected part. And that's important for people in Canada and Mexico and the United States and South America to hear, because they want to do exactly the same with something called the American Union, from the tip of North America to the tip of South America. The European Union Maastricht Treaty, which we've already signed, also means, and it will be the same here unless we wake up, that the gold and foreign currency reserves of every nation state in the European Union, at the point the single bank comes into operation, will move from control of nation-state governments under the control of the 6 unelected bankers in Frankfurt. And there's nothing in the treaty to allow those assets to come back if one of those nations wishes to pull out. The European Union evolved out of a free trade area called the Common Market, the European Economic Community. It's interesting. After problem reaction solution has got the foot in the door, Then comes another mind controlling technique, which comes on the end of it again and again and again. And that is what I call the stepping stones technique. You start here with what you can get away with, but you know that's what you're going to create. But you know that if you suggested that at the start, people would go crazy. Example, the end of the last war, if someone had come along and said, what we're going to do in Europe now is we're going to have a single bank, a single currency, controlled by 6 unelected bankers. We're going to have the political and economic centralized control of the whole of Western Europe and encompass the former Soviet Union countries also over a period of time into a vast superstate east and west. The reaction of people who just spent 5 years trying to stop that would have been, you must be joking, or words to that effect. So what did they do? They sold us what they could get away with at that time, and that was a free trade area. Interesting little point. Adolf Hitler had a vision, an economic vision for Europe had he won the last war. It had a long German name, which I can't pronounce. It's in the books, but I can't pronounce it, and I'd spit all over you, it's one of them words, But it translates exactly into English as the European Economic Community, which we got anyway. So once that was set, it's a free trade area, nothing to worry about. By the way, if we don't join, we starve. That was the line. And then the stepping stones technique. Moving in small steps, each one projected at the public as being isolated and not part of a pattern, until you move into what was planned all along, the European Economic Community. It's at the European Union, rather. It's like growing up with a child in a house, this technique. You grow up with a child, you don't see the child change too much, day by day by day. Someone comes in who hasn't seen the child for months, and their reaction is completely different. My goodness me, haven't you grown? Haven't you changed? Haven't you this? The person who's grown up with a child does not see that anything like as clearly because it's happening. And this is how this technique works. You evolve it along a period of time, and every time you turn on the news or television or read a newspaper, you're seeing it evolving slowly before your eyes, and you don't see the big picture. That is exactly what they're doing out of the North American free trade area. Indeed, when you look at it, they've only got to take in South America, which they control anyway, and it's there. In the Pacific, there's the Pacific Union, which is due to evolve in exactly the same way. If you find something that works, why not stick with it? Out of a free trade area set up in '94 called APEC, the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation, it's called. It's kind of interesting, so I'll come along. The people that set up the European Union and the EEC were people who were frontmen for this group I'm talking about. The people that set up NAFTA were frontmen for this group. George Bush, Brian Mulrooney. And the people that set up that were frontmen for this group, not least the Australian Prime Minister at that time, or just before, called Bob Hawke. And then under this structure comes nation-states and what they wish to do with nation-states, which is break them up into regions to further disunite any opposition to the massive monster structure above. And that's being brought about by problem-reaction solution. Before I leave that subject, that's the problem-reaction solution of the Second World War. You have a global elite, as I call it, the people that control the banking system, the political system, the transnational corporations and stuff. They created the two sides and played them off against each other. My book, And the Truth Will Set You Free, documents they funded Lenin and Trotsky from Wall Street and London to go in and bring about the Bolshevik Revolution. They also put into power Joseph Stalin, who was one of their frontmen. They put into power in the other main allied countries in terms of the war anyway. In Britain, they put up Winston Churchill, the historical version of which is an absolute farce, I have to say. The more information that comes out, Winston Churchill was not the man that history projects him to be. In the United States, we had a major frontman of the 20th century for this group, Franklin Delano Roosevelt. the man who put one of their major symbols, the pyramid and the all-seeing eye at the top of the pyramid on every dollar bill when he was President of the United States. They then funded the Nazis and Adolf Hitler into power. Again, as the book documents, and other people have done so also, of course, that Hitler was funded, and his war machine was funded, via American loans known as the Dawes Plan and the Young Plan, and via the German subsidiaries of American multinational companies, not least the Rockefeller Standard Oil, that was very much connected with a conglomerate that was Hitler's war machine, in truth, called Icke. Also, Hitler was funded from London. It's interesting. Franklin Delano Roosevelt came to power in America in 1933 on the back of an economic collapse. Something must be done. Save us, Mr. Roosevelt. In 1933, Adolf Hitler came to power on the back of a massive economic collapse. Save us, Adolf. And the people, as we'll come to later, that control completely, whether there's boom or a bust, are the people that run the global banks that are owned by them. So, you then play the two sides off in a war. Why do all this? Because nothing changes the nature of a society or a world more than a war. After a war, in terms of it's a country war or whether it's a global war, whatever area is involved, that area is fundamentally changed forever by that conflict. And after that, the Second World War in 30 years or so, came a massive global, understandable, this can't go on. What are they going to do about it? And the solution was the United Nations, Georgia, not war, and in Europe it was the European Economic Community, let's trade together and then we'll stop fighting each other. No, if you live in Europe, they can stop using weapons to fight each other. The United Nations started out as Georgia, not war, that's how it was sold to us. It now goes to war and is getting more and more power, not least the World Health Organization over the use of which is a complete tool of the global pharmaceutical companies. That's the structure. I used to be Michelangelo in a previous life. That's the structure that allows it to happen. All genius is simple, and this could only work if it was simple. That's basically the structure. In every organization today, no matter what it is, a university, a government, a school, a business, they're structured like that. At the top, you've got a tiny, tiny few people who know the big picture. They know what the real agenda is, what they're really trying to achieve. As you come down in any organization, you're meeting more and more and more and more people who know less and less and less and less about what the organization is really about. They only know their part. The human race is not evil. People say, get past human nature, mate. Human nature is whatever the nature of humans decides to be. It's just a choice. But we're evil. It couldn't work if large numbers of people knew what they were contributing to. So, they use a method called compartmentalization. I also call it the mushroom approach, which can be summed up by keep them in the dark and feed them bullshit. It's another way of describing it. Each area of these pyramids is compartmentalized. Somewhere down here, working in the banking system, will have a family, children. They want to leave them a free world and a prosperous world. They don't want to leave them what this clique wants to leave them. But they don't know that they're making a contribution to it. Because they don't know what they're doing or how what they're doing links in with what they're doing, and they're doing, and they're doing, and they're doing to create anything but an innocent picture. They only know what they're doing. And the structure globally is like Russian dolls. You know, one doll inside another, inside another. Well, the structure is pyramids inside pyramids inside pyramids. So, you take that to be a bank. Down here in the bank pyramid, you'll find the person you meet when you go into a bank locally and look across the counter. They won't know what's happening in the bank manager's office behind them. They won't know what's happening at regional level. They won't know what's happening at board level. And board level won't know what's happening in the clique that really runs these organizations. The bank then fuses into the next biggest pyramid, which is the banking global network pyramid. And at the peak of that, all the major national and international banks are owned and controlled by the same people. A transnational corporation is a compartmentalized pyramid that fuses into the global transnational corporation global network, and at the peak of that, the transnational corporations are owned and controlled by the same people, and they're the same people that own the banks. Same with the global media, same with the global politics, and same with the pharmaceutical companies. And they fuse into a tiny clique which is based on bloodlines being passed on through the generations like a baton in a relay race. And this same clique basically through the generations goes on passing the same policy down through all these apparently unconnected areas of our lives. This is why throughout, just look at this century, it doesn't matter what areas of our lives we're looking at, whether it's local business to regional business to national business to transnational corporation, whether it's small bank to regional bank to national bank to global mega bank, whether it's small newspapers owned locally to regional groups to national groups to transnational newspaper media empires. Every area of our lives has shown the same pattern, from power and control and diversity of power and control to more and more centralization of control in all areas of our lives. That's no accident. It's been a policy that has pervaded down through the pyramid. And because we stand here, we say, well, I don't know, mate, it was just an edict from an eye. I know it's stupid, but I'm not to reason why. I'm just a do or die. Get on with it, don't we? We just take this stuff and make it reality without any sense of malevolence or knowledge of what we're involved in. Nothing sums up the compartmentalized pyramid approach more than the global secret society network. Not only do they control the business and the politics, a secret society is a compartmentalized pyramid. That's the very nature. You get initiated into the next level up, and if you're not acceptable, you stop there and never get any higher. But say the Freemasons secret society, that fuses into the global secret society network, and at the peak of that, all the secret societies, the major ones anyway, are controlled by the same people. The Knights of Malta are the Freemasons. The Freemasons are the Skull and Bones Society in America. They're the same organization with the same agenda. But the vast majority of people involved in the Freemasons have not got a clue that they're involved in anything. They go down the local lodge, they roll the trouser leg up, they wheel the wife out for the dinner once a year. It's a bit of a clog to most of them. Vast majority of Freemasons in the world, the overwhelming majority, never get higher than the bottom 3 levels of degree. And I've got it in my pocket. In the Scottish Rite of Freemasonry, which pervades much of world politics and business, there's another 30 official levels above those bottom 3, and above there, goodness knows how many unofficial levels. I saw an old Freemasons book in a second-hand bookshop in Australia, and in there, 4 Freemasons, and it was talking about the 64th and the 75th degree. And at that point, they're on a different planet in terms of their agenda than the vast majority of Freemasons down here, who are used as a front to hide what's really going on behind. And I came across a book by this guy, Albert Pike, I mentioned earlier, set up the Ku Klux Klan. He was the head of the southern jurisdiction of the Scottish Rite of Freemasonry in America. And he wrote a book for high-degree Freemasons called Morals and Dogma. And in it he said this: these bottom 3 levels are known as the blue degrees. Nice brew. The blue degrees are but the outer court or portico of the temple. Part of the symbols are displayed there to the initiate, but he is intentionally misled by false interpretations. It is not intended that he shall understand them, but it is intended that he shall imagine that he understands them. In other words, keep him in the dark and feed him bullshit. Come back to the same thing all the time. Also, an intelligence agency like the CIA is a fiercely compartmentalized pyramid That then fuses into the global secret intelligence agency network, and at the peak of that, all the intelligence agencies are the same organisation. The CIA is British intelligence, is Canadian intelligence, is Mossad, etc., etc. And there's a group of organisations, get to the spiritual stuff soon, but to get 3D out of the way, we need to know this, I think. There's a group of organisations which basically operate in that part of the pyramid. Come to them in a second. And around here, and I'm being optimistic probably, in the pyramid, are the positions of apparent power in the world. This is where you'll find the President of the United States, the Prime Minister of Canada, the head of the World Bank, the Secretary General of NATO. The media reports the world as if these people are there. They act as if they are there. They're nowhere near there. The people above them who own the banks and the transnational corporations and the media, they manipulate events and money to put into positions of power here, apparent power, those which either represent their interests or are no problem to them. The idea that the President of the United States is at the top of the political pyramid. What happens, just before I leave this thing, what happens, say you've got a two-party state in the country like the Republicans and the Democrats. You take a line down the pyramid there. There's the Democrats, there's the Republicans. At this level, the two sides, members of those parties, genuinely think they're fighting each other. They knock on the doors, oh, it'd be terrible if the Democrats get in. Well, they believe it. Up here, they start to see it's all a bit of a game, but there's a few quid in it. Up here, the Republicans are the Democrats. The Democrats are the Republicans. The Labour Party in Britain is the Conservative Party. Now, these organisations that operate in this area, the bottom level of them will be here somewhere. Then you'll get positions of power, and these organisations in their hierarchy go into there. Are a group of organisations that started in Britain in the last century. London is a major centre for this, perhaps the major centre. Not John Major's government, obviously, but the secret society network that coordinates the hidden hand. I think myself that America is being used as a diversion. People in Europe are manipulating America so that people look to America as the big fall guy. Oh, look, it's the Americans. Oh, terrible. And then you don't look who's actually controlling America. For instance, the central bank, or the so-called Central Bank of America, called the Federal Reserve, is a cartel of private banks, and the major stockholders are from Europe. Central Bank of America is supposed to be owned by Europe. It is. So, in the latter part of the last century in Britain, something called the Round Table was set up. It's a secret society with the goal of world government and all this stuff. They met the elite members from Britain and the elite members from America at a place called the Hotel Majestic in Paris in 1919, when they were all there at the Versailles Peace Conference. The major players in the British War Cabinet and the major players in the American War Administration in World War I were all elite members of this. At this meeting in 1919, they decided to start to create offshoot organisations around this central core, which would become, and it has done so, a major portion of the so-called shadow or secret government of the world, which controls our lives today without us realising it. The first of the offshoots in 1920, a year later, was the Royal Institute of International Affairs in London. That is the British Foreign Office, whoever's in power. It doesn't matter what the shade of government is, they run the Foreign Office, and they've got a much wider brief than that. In 1921, a year later, came the American version of that, the Council on Foreign Relations. Since that was set up in 1921, virtually every president of the United States has been a member of the Council on Foreign Relations, and virtually every Secretary of State, and today, as far as I can make out, every single American ambassador anywhere in the world is a member of the Council on Foreign Relations, which, goodness knows, a fraction of American people have even heard of. 1954 came perhaps the most influential of these groups today, the Bilderberg Group, set up at the Bilderberg Hotel in Oosterbeek, Holland in 1954, officially anyway, his first meeting. And then in 1972-73 came the Trilateral Commission set up by the Rockefellers in America, and its role is to coordinate this agenda I'm talking about between three parts of the world, America, Canada, Japan and Europe, hence trilateral. These organizations have among their number the top people in global banking, politics, transnational corporation, education, opinion formers, military, Secretary General of NATO and stuff like that. And they therefore can coordinate the same policy between apparently in the public arena opposing people. So you find that people who oppose each other in the public arena, he don't like him, does he? Are actually members of the same organizations. The last Bilderberg meeting, they meet once a year en masse, but they have a steering committee that meets all the time, was held in Canada, King City, Toronto. To give you an idea of the range of people and positions, from Canada attending this meeting in Toronto, in great secrecy, thank goodness there's one independent-ish newspaper in Canada, the Toronto Star, I think it's called, that did some stuff on it. No one else touched it with a barge pole. There was Mike Harris, the Premier of Ontario, who'd just come back just before that Bilderberg meeting in June last year from a meeting with Bouchard in Quebec, because there's something afoot in Canada to try to break up Canada, make it part of America and integrate it into this American Union. Chrétien, the Prime Minister, he was there. So was, Chrétien has been advised for 30 years by a guy called Mitchell Sharp, very big executive of the Trilateral Commission, Mitchell Sharp. Paul Martin, Finance Minister. Lloyd Axworthy, Foreign Affairs Minister. Conrad Black, who'll get a few mentions for long. Big chairman of Hollinger and controlled by the Bronfman family. Frederick Eaton of the Eaton department store family. Guy called, Gottlieb, Alan Gottlieb, former ambassador to the US. Anthony Griffin, honorary chairman of the Guardian Group. Ted Rogers, a communications and cable mogul. And Red Wilson, chairman of Bell Canada Enterprises. That's the kind of a range of people that you get at these meetings. That are people in positions of influence in all these different areas. It's interesting, in 1954, the Bilderberg Group was set up by people like Prince Bernhard of the Netherlands, and a Polish guy called Joseph Rettinger, and a group of others, and they were exactly the same people that set up the European Economic Community. And this has been the hidden hand in Europe that has been coordinating the stepping stones towards the European Union. Today in Europe, all the major voices that are saying, yes, we must have the single banking currency, are members of this. The head of the European Commission, who's saying you're going to have it anyway, basically, is a guy called Jacques Santer, Bilderberg Group. The guy that took Britain into Europe was the then Prime Minister Ted Heath, Bilderberg Group. Alongside him, when he signed us into Europe, was another former Conservative Prime Minister called Alec Douglas-Home, not only a member of the Bilderberg Group, but for a time its chairman. Opposing, it says here, at that time, was the British Labour Party in opposition to that Conservative administration. And they were led, and they did not oppose going into Europe at all, they were led by Harold Wilson, Bilderberg Group, and their three major players in the Labour Party at that time, Dennis Healey, Bilderberg Group, Roy Jenkins, Bilderberg Group, and a future Prime Minister at that time, James Callaghan, Bilderberg Group. The leader of the third party in Britain, who supported us going into Europe, was a guy called Joe Grimond, Bilderberg Group. Today, the Chancellor of the Exchequer in Britain, who's saying, yes, let's have the single currency, is a guy called Kenneth Clarke, Bilderberg Group. His opposition, the shadow Chancellor, is also saying, yes, that's a good idea. His name is Gordon Brown, Bilderberg Group. On May the 1st, Britain will get a new Prime Minister and he will advance this agenda in Britain big time. His name's Tony Blair. Bilderberg Group, a chosen one. Big time chosen one, Tony Blair. He will become the Prime Minister of Britain on May the 1st. Because it's planned that way. If you look further afield, the last 5 Secretary Generals of NATO, and I only know it's the last 5, that's as far as I've researched back so far. The last 5 Secretary Generals of NATO, the biggest military operation in the world, Joseph Luns, Bilderberg Group, Lord Carrington, Chairman of the Bilderberg Group, Manfred Werner, Bilderberg Group, Billy Place, Bilderberg Group, the present one, Javier Solana, Bilderberg Group. Present head of the World Bank, whose investment policies have created human and environmental catastrophe in what we call the Third World. The present one's a guy called James Wolfenson, Bilderberg Group. And so are a stream of his predecessors, including an American called Robert Strange McNamara. Obviously his mother was a psychic. Bilderberg Group. Where I tell them. What else? Over the last few years, there has been created something in Switzerland called the World Trade Organization. It has now powers to impose major fines on nation states who seek to protect their own economy from imports, and therefore make all economies at the mercy of the world system which the few control. First head of the World Trade Organization, an Irishman, Peter D. Sullivan, Bilderberg Group, replaced by the present one, an Italian, Renato Ruggiero, Bilderberg Group. In 1976, the Carter administration came in to power in America, and he was the first trilateral commission president of the United States. He had 26 members of the trilateral commission in his administration in high positions. He was replaced, because we're free, honey, and we have a choice, by the Reagan-Bush years, which were awash with members of these organizations. And then they were replaced by the Democrats. Again, we have choice of Bill Clinton, and his administrations have been awash with members of these organizations. Canada, America, Germany, Britain, Australia, New Zealand, they are not democracies. They are one-party states, projected as democracies, so that we'll not realize what's going on and therefore not do anything about it. Before I leave this subject, just move on. There's one thing that really sums up what I'm saying about a hidden hand working behind apparently unconnected events and people. Now that's the Bosnian conflict. The Bosnian conflict was problem-reaction solution to advance the agenda of the World Army under central control. At the start of the Bosnian conflict, the status quo was the United Nations peacekeeping operation. Had that worked and been effective, that would still be the case now. From our point of view, great, because it would have worked. From the agenda's point of view, nightmare, because they wouldn't have advanced further to their goal. So the United Nations peacekeeping operation was thoroughly discredited and embarrassed on purpose. The more horrific pictures came out of Bosnia, the understandable global political and public reaction was, this can't go on, something must be done. What are they going to do about it? And the solution has been a 60,000 strong world army, the biggest multinational force assembled since the Second World War. The agenda has moved on. New precedent has been set. Therefore, given that, and given the agenda of these organizations is a world army, it's interesting to look at the common themes between every major peace negotiator in Bosnia since that conflict began. The first European Union peace negotiator appointed was Lord Carrington, British politician, President of the Royal Institute of International Affairs, Chairman of the Bilderberg Group, Trilateral Commission member. He was replaced by another British politician, Lord David Owen, Bilderberg Group, Trilateral Commission, who was replaced by the former Swedish Prime Minister, Carl Bildt, Bilderberg Group. While they were there on behalf of the European Union, they were working closely alongside the United Nations appointed peace negotiators. The first one was Cyrus Vance, Bilderberg Group Trilateral Commission Council on Foreign Relations, who was replaced by a Norwegian, Thorvald Stoltenberg, Bilderberg Group Trilateral Commission. When that came to nothing and the horror went on, Out of the blue, amid worldwide publicity, came an independent peace negotiator, Jimmy Carter, first Trilateral Commission President of the United States, Council on Foreign Relations member. That came to nothing in the end, and along came the group of people who negotiated the so-called Dayton Agreement which put into place the World Army. First one of these was a guy called Richard Holbrooke, Bill Clinton's peace envoy. Richard Holbrooke, Bilderberg Group, Trilateral Commission, Council on Foreign Relations. He answered to the Secretary of State at that time, Warren Christopher, Trilateral Commission, Council on Foreign Relations, who worked with the Defense Secretary, William Perry, Bilderberg Group, and they all answered to the President, Bill Clinton, Bilderberg Group, Trilateral Commission, Council on Foreign Relations, who answered, and all presidents answer, to the unelected David Rockefeller, leading executive and funder of the Trilateral Commission, the Bilderberg Group, Council on Foreign Relations, and they're all to do with international affairs. The first head of the World Army in Bosnia was Admiral Leighton Smith, Council on Foreign Relations, and the civilian operation there is headed by Carl Bildt, Bilderberg Group. Just a coincidence, nothing to worry about. Now, if I can establish that, and other researchers can establish that, actually I think that bit's original research, because I follow my nose for that one, but other people have kind of established similar things and similar connections. Why can't the millions of journalists in the world who are paid to tell us what's going on do the same? I had a guy from the Daily Mirror, major tabloid newspaper in Britain last year, asked me how to spell Bilderberg Group. You know, you cannot bribe or twit. Well, there's another reason why this stuff doesn't get out through the mainstream media. These own the media. You don't hear about any of this stuff in 52% now of newspapers in about it in Telegraph newspapers in Britain. You don't hear about it in a stream of newspapers in Australia, known as the 150 magazines and newspapers worldwide, including the Jerusalem Post, because that lot is owned by the Hollinger Group, which is owned by Conrad Black, not just a member of the Bilderberg Group, but one of its inner core elite, controlled by the Bronfman family. The Hollinger Group has an interesting history. 52% of newspapers in Canada now are owned by that, owned by British intelligence. Interesting story, this. During the last war, intelligence, an elite corps known as the Special Operations Executive, called War Supplies Limited, and it was run and fronted by two of their agents called Edward Plunkett Taylor, who later wrote the banking laws for the Cayman Islands, and another agent of British intelligence called George Montague Black. After the war, Argus Corporation, and it started buying up media outlets all over the place, and it's been more recently changed its name to the Hollinger Group. It's still a front for British intelligence, and it owns things like the Vancouver Sun and goodness knows what else. We don't hear about any of this in the Washington Post. The Washington Post is owned, or it seems to be, she's owned as well, by Catherine Graham, Bilderberg Group, Trilateral Foreign Relations. We don't hear about it in the New York Times, the Los Angeles Times, in ABC, CBS, NBC, because they're all under control. What you do, we're coming back to this here, what you do is you control the money, you control the transnational corporations, you control the politics, and you control how that's reported to the people. Knowledge, ignorance. Before I get to the spiritual side of this time, what would we do? Well, that's the end of that. That's the Isle of Wight, the snow. Nothing sums up, I guess, the extent to which we've given our power away and the extent to which we have lost more than the world financial system, which seems to be very complicated. It's great to scam this. What you do is you make something very simple sound really complicated. People switch off, don't they? They go, oh, I can't be bothered with it. It's and or Jeopardy is, that's a new one, isn't it? The Price is Right. Have you seen that audience? What's it on? I've got this idea, you see. I've got this theory that somewhere in the Nevada desert there's this factory making people. Right? Only they kind of leave something out of the construction. And then they bust them around America. They bust them to become the audience on The Price is Right. Then they take them to the Democratic Convention. Then they take them to the Republican Convention. Because they're all the same. Hyper people. I'm sure they're the same people at them conventions, you know. They just give them different coloured hats on. Very strange. The Price is Right. Imagine, looking down from the Pleiades at that. Funny. Mind you, they're probably worse. They probably have something worse they do. Anyway, this world financial system. The con is, well, there's two major cons within the big con. What we're told through the schools and universities and by the highly paid economics correspondents is two things. First of all, governments create money. That's the impression we're given. When inflation's going up, they're saying the government's creating too much money. They don't create enough. They hardly create any. 90% and more of money brought into circulation is brought into circulation by private banks owned by the same people issuing non-existent money called credit. That's how our unit of exchange comes into existence, via fresh air. The other thing we're told is that what banks do is that they take money which people deposit with them and they lend it out at a higher interest rate to people that want loans, therefore making a few quid. Once again, that is the last thing these guys are doing. They're lending fresh air. Because the same people who control the politicians have also controlled the banks for a long time now, laws have been passed which allow private banks to lend at least 10 times what they've got on deposit. Fresh air. And we're paying interest on it. Duh. There's a little simple explanation of how this kind of works, even for a former Coventry goalkeeper. A bank here has one depositor, puts in $1 million, dead simple. Guy comes along, wants to borrow 100 grand. Now before he can do that, which turns out to be fresh air, he's got to commit to the bank wealth that does exist. His house, his business and all that stuff. And if he don't pay back interest on money that doesn't exist, they get his wealth that does. Take me home, mother, it's mad down here. But we're so grateful, have you noticed that? We're sitting in the bank manager's office, aren't we? The little ticker's going, oh, my best suit. Oh, my God. Will he lend me money that doesn't exist and let me pay interest on it? Oh, my God. We're so impressed by professional positions, aren't we? My mother is. Back in the 50s and the 60s when I was a kid, when the doctor came, it was like a royal visit. It's like that here. It was. All the windows were clean, best cooks came out, Uber came out, because the doctor's coming. And she was ever so grateful, thank you for coming, doctor. I said, you're paying him, mother. She back out the room. Thank you ever so much for giving me those pills to overcome the effect of the last one you gave me. I'm ever so grateful. Anyway, what was he saying? Oh yeah, bank then do to justify charging this guy interest on 100 grand? It does that. That's it. Not one note is printed, not one coin is minted, not one piece of precious metal is moved anywhere. That's all they do. They type the figure into his account. It is a book ledger, as was now a computer operation. And from that moment on, that guy is paying interest on 100 grand. That has never, does not, and will never exist. This world is up to its neck on an individual business and company level and country level, in debt on fresh air. That's the reality of the situation. And this is not just naval contemplating again, this is fundamental to control. Because if you ask most people why they're not doing what they really want to do and saying and being what they really want to say and be, it will be, yes, fear of what other people think of me. Yeah. But it will also be, well, mate, I've got to keep my head down because I've got to keep my mouth shut because, I might lose my job and all that stuff. In other words, we fear not being able to earn enough money for the basics of life. So if you can artificially inflate the price of everything, you are more focusing people on that problem, and you're making it more difficult for them to earn the basics of life. Therefore, they're working harder and harder and harder, their heads down, and they're not looking there at any level. And this is what this scam does. It means, for instance, that we buy 3 or 4 houses for the privilege of living in one. And who benefits from this? Not the guy who builds it, he's paid out the price of one. Not the supplier of the materials, he's paid out the price of one. The only person that benefits, who benefits from us buying 3 or 4 houses to live in one, is the guy that's lending us money that doesn't exist and charging us interest on it. I went into a bank in Britain called the National Westminster Bank, and I got one of their mortgage leaflets out of interest, and it was in black and white on this thing. If I took out a £50,000 loan to buy a house with this bank, I would pay them back 152 grand. And on the front of the leaflet it said, the National Westminster Bank, we're here to make life easier. So the mortgage rate could come down immediately by 2/3 if governments issued the currency interest-free. How much taxation every year, it's billions and billions every year in America on the federal level, goes just to pay the interest on private banks' non-existent lending to governments. The American government, and it's the same with all governments, they could print their money interest-free, put it into circulation interest-free. Therefore, there's no interest to pay. Instead, what the American government does is borrow their money from something called the Federal Reserve System, a cartel of private banks called Federal to kid the people, which is actually no more federal than Federal Express. The current head of the Federal Reserve is Alan Greenspan, Bilderberg Group, Trilateral Commission, Council on Foreign Relations. He replaced a guy called Paul Volcker, Bilderberg Group, Trilateral Commission, Council on Foreign Relations. Like any wet paint on your hands, isn't it? They get anywhere. And the government can print its own money interest-free. According to what I can ascertain, 2 American presidents have suggested and even started to introduce in some small way interest-free money printed by the government instead of borrowing it from the private banks. One is John F. Kennedy, the other one was Abraham Lincoln. They have one of the things in common. Also, what this means is that every single product we pick off the shelf of any kind is vastly inflated in terms of its price compared with what it needs to be, because right along the production, transportation, advertising, selling process of that product that puts it on the shelf, each group and organization and person along that road is adding extra to their prices because they're borrowing non-existent money from banks and they have to pay back interest on it. It's a massive scam. Not only that, this is It's built into the system that the debt must get bigger. Because when you go into a bank and you borrow money, they, even in the ludicrous way they do, they create it into some kind of nonsensical existence, but they only create what you've borrowed. Say 50 grand. But you're not paying back 50 grand, you're paying back 50 grand plus the interest. They haven't created the interest, only the capital. So where's the interest and all these loans got to come from? It's got to come from the money in circulation. And that means, in simple mathematics, that there is never ever enough money in circulation to pay back all the capital and all the interest on all the debt. Ever. So there always comes a point where some people go bankrupt because some people have to, if some people are not going to, because of the way the money works. And we see it with governments. They get to the point where they can no longer service the capital on the debt, and they borrow more just to pay back the interest on the old loans. Because it's structured like that. And there's one other major aspect to this. What is the difference between an economic depression and an economic boom? One thing and one thing alone. The amount of units of exchange in circulation. That's all it is. When there's a depression, people don't choose not to want to eat anymore. They don't say, oh, I don't want a house anymore, I don't want a job anymore. There's not enough units of exchange in circulation to have the economic activity which allows them to eat, have a home and a job. When there's a boom, there's a vast amount of units of exchange in circulation, therefore lots of economic activity. And what happens during a boom? Lots of economic activity because there's lots of exchange in circulation. So, companies wish to increase their production to meet demand. And what do to do that? They borrow more money from the banks. So, debt goes up during a boom, and then what do the banks do? Because the banks, controlled by the same people, have absolute control over the units of exchange and how much is in circulation. Big boom, big debt, take the unit of exchange out. Stop lending so much money, call in lots of the debts that are already out there. Depression, bankruptcy. What do the banks get? All that wealth that does exist. Thank you very much. And over many centuries, this is how this organization has taken over the world. And a few people can't control the planet, it's a piece of cake. Which is where we come in. Because 5 billion people can only be controlled by a handful, because 5 billion people have given their power away on the most incredible scale. But we take it back and this is all over. Because this is a house of cards, like I said at the start, which depends on us being sheep and not multidimensional infinity. When I first started, I had this explosion in my head 6 years ago, 7 years ago. I heard this line, we create our own reality. I thought that feels good to me, that feels right. There must be a way that we do it. A simple way that it happens if it does happen. And it seems to me it works like this. This next 10 minutes or so might not seem to be related to this, but it fundamentally is. The way we got into this mess, I feel a way out of it, which can be exited quick. For me, everything that exists in creation is the same energy, and energy is consciousness. They're the same thing. We are like droplets of water in an ocean of consciousness, individual to an extent, but altogether we are the whole. At this moment, there are droplets of water crashing on the shore of Vancouver, of the south coast of England, of Australia, California, all over the world, but they are droplets of the same mass of water. We are each other. We are but we are unique aspects of everything, and that's what we have so comprehensively given up in so many examples. The evolutionary process is dead simple. experience, learn, evolve. Dead simple. You have the experience, you learn from the consequences of the decisions you make, you move on. If we had random experiences, then our evolution would be incredibly slow, because we'd have experiences here, we'd learn everything they had to offer, and we'd say, been there, done that, got the t-shirt, move on. But because experiences were random, we'd go on at different points by the law of averages, having the same experiences, and we think, what's the point in this? I've been there. So what this genius of creation has done is set up designer evolution, which I think works like this. I think this whole thing that I'm saying was summed up by an American comedian called Bill Hicks, who died in 1994 at the age of 33. Very brave man, very profound and intelligent man. And he said, matter is merely energy condensed to a slow vibration. We're all one consciousness experiencing itself subjectively. There's no such thing as death. Life is just a dream, and we are the imagination of ourselves. And it's that last point, the imagination of ourselves, which allows us to create our own reality, which works like this for me. We are broadcasting a magnetic pattern which is unique to us. It's a unique expression of our imagination of ourselves. Our point in the evolutionary journey, where we're at, because it's a magnetic pattern, we feel it on people. We say good and bad vibes and all this stuff, we feel it on people. That magnetic pattern is pulling towards it other magnetic energy fields that sync with what we're putting out. These energy fields are known better as people, places, ways of life, experiences. So when we look through our eyes, we are looking at a physical replica of our imagination of ourselves. It's a very simple process because everything is thought. The physical world is merely thought made physical. This is thought made physical. Fear made physical, actually. This event tonight is thought made physical. I was asked to come here by someone who thought to ask me. I thought to accept. People thought to come. Someone thought at some point to build this building. This is thought made physical, this event, because everything is. Every physical action is preceded by a thought that decides to do it. So, if we change the way we think, we change the physical world. If we have a physical world based on fear within us, we will express that out as a world built on fear. If we express love from within us, we make a physical world based on love. It's just a choice. So for me, what happens is you're looking at yourself when you look at the people, places, ways of life that we experience. Because the pressure is always to externalize responsibility, we're actually giving power to control our own destiny away. Because if you take your power back and you're in a situation you don't like and you say, right, I pulled this towards me, it must have been for a reason. What am I meant to gain from this? Taking your power. What am I meant to gain from this? Right, got it. Move on. At that point, you picked up the learning. Your imagination of yourself has changed. Therefore, the magnetic pattern you're putting out has subtly changed. So it stops pulling in that experience because you're not thinking with it anymore because you don't need it. And you move on and you pull something else in and the journey of evolution goes on. What happens if you externalize blame is your pattern doesn't change. Because instead of saying, what am I going to learn from this? Got it. Change pattern. Move on. We say things like, someone does something we don't like. It's, ooh, God, I hate it. It's his fault. It's all his fault. If it wasn't for him, I wouldn't be in this state. So, you haven't changed. So the pattern you're putting out hasn't changed. So it goes on pulling in the same pattern all the way through your life. Because you're externalizing responsibility for it. Summed up by a wonderful line I came across if you always do what you've always done, you'll always get what you've always got. Now this is fundamental to what I'm talking about here. Because if we allow outside messages through the media, peer pressure, education, whatever, to program our imagination of ourselves, we are allowing this through us to create our physical experience. And what do I hear all over the English-speaking world? Again and again, the same line. I'm just an ordinary man and woman in the street. I've got no power. I'm just Joe Public. I've never met an ordinary man and woman in my life. They don't exist except in our minds. We're all extraordinary. But if we take on the idea that we are ordinary, that's what we put out. That's what we put in. You take on the idea that we are powerless. Out it goes. In comes a life physically that reflects powerlessness. Nothing is more controllable, and nothing has given its power away more than the victim mentality. We've all been there. I have. I could have feared for England at one time. I felt guilty for the country at all. Well, I've been in all these things, maybe. But the victim mentality will always create the victim reality. The world's awash with victims because the world's awash with people conditioned to see themselves as victims. You're in that victim situation and you're saying, it's me colour, it's me sexuality, it was me father, it was me upbringing, it was me job. In other words, everything's in control of my life, not me. Therefore, that's the fire that goes out. They are the magnetic fields it pulls in, and you surround yourself with a physical experience which comes from victimization. Then comes the point, because we've all been there, like I say, we've all been in victim mode, it's just that the summit gets squatted right, doesn't it? And there came a point in my life where I said, hold on a minute, do you know there's one common denominator between all the things that happen in your life, mate? It's you. So you're responsible. Not handing off to anyone else. And at that point, I started to say, right, if I've created the circumstances I don't like, I can create the ones I do. I'm not a victim, I'm in control. And what happens at that point is that the mind changes. So it stops pulling in victim circumstances to create the victim reality. It starts pulling in little coincidences, like people coming into your life at just the right time, with just the right contacts and knowledge to help you out of the circumstances you want to get out of. And if you don't know what you're doing, you say things like, honestly, mate, I was so lucky. He came at just the right time. No, you created it because you've taken control of your life again. And this is why, because at the top of this pyramid of knowledge and stuff here, the spiritual laws and the spiritual knowledge of vibrations and consciousness and magnetic fields and stuff that has been ridiculed or condemned in the public arena for centuries via inquisitions and ridicule and stuff like that, has been to keep out of the public arena the knowledge held here that has been passed on over vast amounts of time and added to in each generation at the highest levels of this secret society network. This is why they wish to hold that knowledge there and keep it from us, or if they let us have it, do it with a twist. So that instead of saying, yeah, I am me, I am free, we say, I'm a bit free, but Ashtar's still in control. In other words, I'm freer than I was, but a little bit. So, from where I'm standing anyway, three things would bring this whole thing down in a very short space of time because of what would come from this. And would change our lives from victim to destiny, control of destiny. One, we individually step out of the fear of what other people think of us. Because it doesn't matter. We just think it does. Some people say to me sometimes, they say, hey, I've got a problem with you. I say, do you know you summed it up perfectly? You've got a problem. I don't have a problem with me. I hope you sort the problem out. Thank you very much. But if we fear what other people think of us, we get pulled in there, don't we? Why has he got a problem with me? What's the matter? What's wrong with me? Now two people have got problems instead of one. Leave them to it. Let them sort it out. When we step out of fear of what other people think of us, we cease to be a sheep. When enough of us do it, we cease to be a herd. This is already in desperate trouble. Secondly, we let everyone else express their uniqueness, even if crime of crime, it acts to differ from what we think. At that point, we cease to be the police force of the herd. And thirdly, the balance point, no one seeks to impose what they believe or desire on anyone else, always respecting free will. And if we're not adult enough to live together like that, then we deserve to be manipulated. But we don't. We're not going to be for very long because this is the turning of the tide. It's no accident that it's at the same point that more and more people are waking up to who they really are. It's the same point that the veil is starting to lift on this stuff behind which it is hidden for goodness knows how long. The same energy that is acting as a spiritual alarm clock for increasing numbers of people is the same energy that's bringing this to the surface. We are in the healing crisis of planet Earth and human consciousness. For something to heal, the cause of the disease has to be dealt with. It has to be brought to the surface, healed and dealt with. While this is hidden behind smoke screens and mirrors and gone on pulling strings without us realizing this, it has eaten away at human evolution without us realizing it. Now it's coming to the surface and we can see it. The other day, I'm lying on my bed and I'm feeling like death. I'm feeling really bad in this area, you know. I've got to speak that night in Bradford, which could have been one. No, Bradford's fine. Bradford's fine. I'm not in Bradford. And I remember saying, look, if I'm going to talk tonight, something's got to happen here because I feel like death. Within about 3 minutes, I'm having a close encounter with a piece of porcelain, see. And of course, that's horrible in the moment. But within 2 minutes, I felt okay. The cause of the problem had been removed. And I was starting to heal. And this is what for me is happening on the earth today. This stuff's rising to the surface, which is why people up there saying, it's negative, don't talk about it, oh my God, are actually ignoring what needs to be addressed and healed so that we can all move on into the next great cycle of human evolution. And like everything, it's just a choice. If I can remember what he said, Bill Hicks said one other thing that I recall, or I might not recall it, let's see what he said. He was talking about life and what it was. And he said, life is like a ride in an amusement park. And when you go on it, you think it's real because that's how powerful our minds are. And the ride goes up and down, round and round. It has thrills and chills and it's very brightly coloured and very loud. And it's fun for a while. Some have been on the ride for a long time and they come back to us and they say, hey, don't worry, don't be afraid ever because this is just a ride. And we kill those people. Shut him up. We've got a lot invested in this ride. Shut him up. Look at my furrows of worry and my big bank account and my family. This has to be real. It's a ride. And yet we kill those good guys who try to tell us that and we let the demons run amok. But it doesn't matter because it's just a ride. And we can change it anytime we want. No job, savings of money, just a choice right now between fear and life. And in the end, that's all it is. We're surveying and we're seeing a world created by fear. Therefore, we see the world as being created. We can create a world by love and create a very different physical experience. Not a prison, but a paradise. Not love in the sense that we come to understand it. Oh, I love you if I fancy you, darling. or I love you if what you do is acceptable to me, or I love you if you conform to the blueprint I think is acceptable to love. It's I love you because you exist, and what's the other point of doing anything else? It's being able to look at some of the people involved in this and say, I love you. I'm not going to stand for what you're doing because you're seeking to impose on all of us, but I love you because you're part of me and I'm part of you. We're not going to get rid of this with anger and aggression and Henry Kissinger, I hear sometimes. We're going to love it out of existence because we love it into existence. What we're going to do it is by setting ourselves free at the same time setting everyone else free. I once asked Gandhi what he thought of civilization, and he replied, I have a good idea. Ask me what I think of freedom. I think it would be a very good idea, because I don't think we've tried it yet in known human history. So often people who talk about freedom, including many people that investigate the conspiracy, are not talking about freedom. They're talking about wishing to replace an imposition they don't like with an imposition they do. That's not freedom. It's time to try the real thing, I think. And it's just a thought. You don't fight for freedom, you peace for freedom if you love for freedom. I just finished with the words of a guy down in America who's written new words for the American National Anthem, which is an English song. I didn't know that. It is. Apparently, he was telling me that when they had the Declaration of Independence and all that stuff in America, they wanted to choose. Drug tunes in Canada and sweets. Would tunes help you breathe more easily? Oh no. Well, that's okay. That. Coming here on April the 29th and April the 29th. And 30th, I thought it was, are two people, Mark Phillips and Kathy O'Brien. And I'd really urge you to come because she is a remarkable human being who I have had the privilege to meet in the last 9 months, and I've actually done 2 weekends with them talking about what I'm talking about and what they're talking about, which completely connects. And before we take questions, there's just one kind of very important area I feel needs to get out. And it's not very pleasant, but we need to know about it. It's a tremendously important aspect of what we're talking about. And that is mind control. What I was talking about earlier was the way that the mass consciousness, mind manipulated, and the emotions are manipulated. Problem, reaction, solution is the manipulation of emotions. Get them angry, get them in fear, all this stuff. But it's actually done on a very individual basis also. In the last 9 months, I've actually been stunned. I thought I'd never be shocked again. But I've been stunned, not just at the, not by the fact that mind control goes on, not by the fact that Satanism, as we call it, for want of a description, goes on, but the scale of it and the organization of it I've found absolutely stunning. There is across the world, in Canada and in America and Britain and these other countries, an operation in mind control of men, women, and particularly children. When I was in America on my way out to Australia, I had a in Los Angeles, and I used it just to call people and do some research. And because of things that have come to my way, I started to try to find out how many children went missing in America every year, not to be seen again. Because I knew the figure in Britain, compared with our population of 57 million, was because of time constraints, I in the end couldn't get the whole overall figure I wanted, though it easily worked out really an estimate. because I rang Washington to try to find out how many children went missing in 1996 that weren't found again, and they said there were no federal figures kept, which I just about kept on my chair. They could tell me how many automobiles went missing, but not children. Eventually, I come across this missing children line that runs across America, and I rang them, and they were very helpful. They confirmed there was no federal figures, but they faxed to me every one of their branches in every state. I only had time to ring one before I had to get on the plane, but that was significant enough. Because of things that, again, that have been coming to me, I've got my eye very strongly on Colorado, where there seems to be a very major satanic stroke child abduction thing. And so I rang Colorado first, and they're very helpful. And they said that 1996, this is an independent organization, not Colorado Social Services. They said in 1996, 19,000 children were missing in Colorado, 11,000 were found, which has left 8,000 in Colorado alone unaccounted for from 1996. And I said, is Colorado an unusual state? She said, no, it usually goes on a ratio to population, basically. So if you rank California, you find the figure was higher. I said, is this an unusual year? No, it's about the average at the moment. I said, what happens to these kids? No idea. So I thought, let's work this out across 50 years. 50 times 8,000 in 1 year. And they're the ones that hit the paperwork and the computer databases. What about all the extras that don't get into the official stream and aren't documented who go missing? You're probably talking 500,000 children and young people going missing every year and never be seen again. Now, obviously, some of them go missing for reasons that are explainable in the normal course of events. They run away and stuff. But it fits in magnificently, that figure, with other information that I've been gathering about what happens to at least tens of thousands of children in America every year, probably in Canada, almost certainly in Canada, and in Europe and Australia. I found the same there. And that is, they are taken in to satanic rings, taken into mind control operations run by the hidden hand through the United States government and others. We have given the world away to Satanists. Extraordinary. Over the last 9 months, having established key and continually recurring names and organizations with regard to control of the banking system, the political system, the transnational corporations, suddenly I start coming across this Satanism stuff. I found that it is structured in exactly the same way, pyramids with pyramids, and you get to the top of the pyramid, you see the same names and organizations coming up. And some very famous names. I'll tell you the background to how this came about in America, or one way it came about. During the last war in Germany, they had the concentration camps, and so they had a supply of people and children to experiment in terms of genetics and mind control. Towards the end of the war, because, as I said earlier, the same people that controlled the Americans and the British and the French also controlled the Nazis, the hidden hand behind all of them, in effect, the Nazis were doing mind control research and genetic research on behalf of the hidden hand. So when the Allies arrived, there was a British intelligence, American intelligence operation called Operation Paperclip, which is hit the fringes of some of the mainstream media here and there, but no, not the centre of it. And Operation Paperclip was to get out of Nazi Germany at the end of the war and just after the experts, the Nazi experts in mind control and genetic engineering into America and South America to continue their work for the hidden hand. Out of this came something called MK Ultra, a notorious mind control operation set up by the CIA and whoever controls the CIA. The CIA is just an agency who controls the program. My understanding of it, it was called MK Ultra, Mind Control Ultra, with MK, not MC, because they used the German spelling of control in deference to the Nazis who had inspired it. The horrendous effects on people, wiping their minds of every memory. 30 and 40, 50 years of age had to be toilet trained after it because they couldn't remember how to do it. Actually hit mainstream media because of compensation claims and stuff, and the government had to admit during the 70s that actually MK Ultra was a reality and had happened, and what you hear all the time is what has not hit the mainstream media, although my goodness me, it's going to hit big time in the next 2 years, is an offshoot of MK Ultra known as Project Monarch, of which Kathy O'Brien is the most famous mind-controlled child and grown-up woman, because they took her when she was just a toddler, and she didn't get out of it until she was 30. And her story, as I'm uncovering in Europe and America, came across from Australia and waiting for me in Seattle, was a documentation from someone who lives in America who was saying exactly the same that happened to her, that happened to Kathy O'Brien with all the backup stuff. This is not a rare story. What's rare about Kathy O'Brien is that the mind was healed by the guy Mark Phillips, who's also going to talk, and they're going out big time and telling the story. And they produced a book called Transformation of America, which has now been out for, 18 months, 2 years. And they go all around talking about it, naming the names as I do, and they're still waiting for the first writ or threat of legal action to let this through. What happened to Kathy was that she was brought up in Michigan, and her father was a paedophile called Earl O'Brien, who, because of what then unfolded, is now a very rich man. The Nazis found two main things in relation to this story. First of all, they recognized that the mind has a natural defense mechanism, that word again, which compartmentalizes and shuts off from the conscious level memories of extreme trauma. This shows itself when people have a major road accident and they can't remember the run-up, the impact, or the immediate aftermath because it's so horrendous. It compartmentalizes the memory, shuts it off from the conscious level. Compartmentalizes it. That's good, and it's a natural defense mechanism. But they realized that if you can systematically, especially from an early age, traumatize a child with sexual abuse, violence, deprivation, food deprivation, sugar deprivation, overwork, you would break up their mind systematically into a series of self-contained compartments, neither of which was aware that the other compartment existed. One name for this, an inaccurate name, is multiple personality disorder. And it's inaccurate because these are not multiple personalities, these are fragments of mind. More accurately, it's called DID, dissociative identity disorder, where the mind disassociates itself from the memory of the trauma and shuts it out. By the time we're talking to Mark Phillips, by the time Kathy's mind was well under the way to being healed, when he sprung her out of captivity, he said to me he gave up counting at 1,500 fragments of mind that he'd found, isolated from each other. The other thing, and this relates to Kathy O'Brien and many, many of the others that I've come across, is that the Nazis found that there are certain genetic streams which make people more open to this form of mind control. One of those genetic streams is the sexually abused, children who are sexually abused by their parents, who were themselves sexually abused by their parents. That stream, for some reason, is much more open to this form of mind control, and these people become more robotic than normal under this procedure. When she was a toddler, they had people around the world called finders on this project. And their job is to identify children of this genetic stream. And then they go missing, or their parents have pressure put on. This lady who wrote to me and gave me her documented story when I arrived in America 2 days ago, said that her mother and father had to give her as a child to this project because they were told that they either gave her away or they'd kill her. So they gave her away. Her mother's last words to her, one day you're going to be free. She was a little kid then. Kathy O'Brien was chosen because she was the sexually abused child of sexually abused parents. Her father, Earl O'Brien, ran or made pornographic films back in the 50s and sold them through the Michigan media. Kathy O'Brien was used in those films, and maybe that's where they picked her up. Anyway, one day, out of the blue, one of these films is picked up in the post, intercepted. And a man came along from Latvia and said to her father, you will either let us have your child for our project, or you'll get prosecuted for this. If you let us have your child, you'll get immunity from prosecution. Earl O'Brien, not being the most balanced man ever to walk planet Earth, thought this was a great idea, which is why he's a very rich man today. The man who took Kathy O'Brien away and made that ultimatum to her father later became very famous. He was a pornographer linked to the Michigan Mafia, who later became better known as Gerald Ford, President of the United States. Kathy O'Brien is then put through Roman Catholic schools, some of which are fronts for trauma-based mind control. She names them in the book. She went through to be sexually abused on a number of occasions at a place called Mackinac Island, just over the border from Canada, I understand, by a man that will be well known in Canada, Pierre Trudeau, many times Prime Minister of Canada. Again, who she's been naming for goodness knows how long. She spoke in Toronto relatively recently and said all this stuff. Still waiting for a writ, still waiting for any reaction. This went on, and she was used for many things, and I'll talk about what they're used for and why they do this in a minute. But in 1980, she gave birth to a child while in captivity called Kelly O'Brien, who I've been to see. She's in a center in Knoxville, Tennessee now. Thanks to the publicity and the pressure from people who read Transformation of America and heard them speak and bombarded the governor of Tennessee with letters with very few syllables in them, I must say. Kelly O'Brien's no longer in the project. She's in a center. And she's an amazing kid. She's 16 now, but she's still programmed. And what they do with these compartments is that they open and shut them. They program these individual compartments once they've got them with certain goals, things to do. And then they open and shut them. It's called switching, with key words, key sentences, or even key actions. I think one of the things that opened one of Kathy Bryant's compartments was shaking keys in front of her eyes very vigorously. And this switches then into another compartment. And that compartment then becomes the conscious level of the person. It's basically turning the mind, the three-dimensional mind, if you like, into a radio dial, and you're flicking across the stations. And it's like a radio station. You go off one station onto another, that station's not aware of that one's existence because they're on different wavelengths, different parts of what they're broadcasting on. So Kelly is programmed as a 16-year-old wonderful girl to be an assassin. And the trigger word would turn her into that mode. Kathy O'Brien is one of the very rare people who was sprung out of captivity by Mark Phillips and then over a period of time deprogrammed. I'll come to that in a second. Kelly O'Brien, the daughter, is straight as a baby into Project Monarch and given the treatment right the way through her early years. And one of her chief abusers, sexual abusers, was George Bush, before and while he was President of the United States. When George Bush made a visit to Australia, an alternative magazine out there, I've seen the front cover. It had a front cover. It was called Inside News. The front cover said, "Is George Bush the most famous child abuser in the world?" Because out of the public arena, this stuff has started to leak out over the last few years. On radio stations and everything, and I'm still waiting for something. Another person who is linked to the New World Order, closely linked to Bush, especially while he was Prime Minister, while he was President rather, and an abuser in a mind-controlled state of Kathy O'Brien, Kelly O'Brien, and a stream of other mind-controlled slaves in Project Monarch, is Brian Mulrooney. They were taken over the border to a place near Niagara Falls for him. Probably still going on to this day because he's still involved behind the scenes because he's a member of the secret society network that's doing this. The country music industry is used as a vehicle to get massive amounts of drugs onto the American streets and as a front for this. Kathy O'Brien's handlers were both linked to the country music industry. One was called Wayne Cox, a Satanist, and the other one was called Alex Houston, an entertainer on the country music circuit. One of Kelly O'Brien's other chief abusers was a guy called Boxcar Willie, a famous country music singer in America. And that name, Boxcar Willie, is not by accident. The international code name of Project Monarch is the Freedom Train. I love playing with words and saying exactly the opposite of what something is. The Freedom Train. Boxcar Willie was a CIA creation created by CIA money. And Boxcar Willie is the symbolism that he is the boxcar on the Freedom Train that runs the operation, or much of it, within the country music industry. Another one who is born into a CIA family, became an actor, became a country music singer, and is actually a mind controller who's skilled in this stuff, is a guy called Chris Christopherson. And another CIA guy who runs drugs and has done back since the 50s, and also is a handler for mind-controlled slaves, is a very, very famous man, Jerry Lee Lewis. One of the things that Kathy says is that if ever she was any trouble to them, they said to her again and again, "If you don't do as you're told, we'll sell you to Jerry Lee." He's infamous within this whole operation. And the names go on and on. I've got a book that's actually just arriving in Vancouver tomorrow called I Am Me, I'm Free, which is basically about deconditioning ourselves, but there is a chapter which blows the whistle on this also. Now, what happened to Kathy O'Brien, and of course they'll speak about it more at length, is that Mark Phillips, earlier on in his life, actually worked in mind research. Not mind control research, but research into the power of the mind and how to heal the mind and what the mind is. He worked as a civilian for the United States government through something called the Ampex Corporation, I think it was. And one of the things Mark says, because this is, I mean, I know this sounds really negative, a lot of this stuff, but you know the stuff they're using in this highly malevolent way, the knowledge they're using can heal diseased minds, imbalanced minds. The mentally ill don't have to be mentally ill. They know how to heal them. And instead of using that knowledge in a positive way, they use it in a malevolent way. And after a while, Mark Phillips got sick of the way things were going. He got out into business and became a successful businessman. And eventually, towards the end of the 80s, he came across a guy called Alex Houston, who he knew was a crook, but Houston offered him a very good business deal, and they did a contract. And it was with the Chinese government. And Mark Phillips flew out to Hong Kong and China to do the deal with the Chinese government. When he got to China, he was approached by a member of the Chinese Defense Department who said, "We'll do a deal with you, we'll work with you, but we're not working with your partner." And Mark Phillips thought this was a bit of a trying to stitch him up. And he said, "Look, I know the guy's a crook, but it ain't going to be a problem. The contract's stitched up, don't worry about it." No. That is a very bad man. He's involved in the white slavery operation and drug running, and it goes into the White House, said the Chinese defense official. Which made Mark Phillips actually very angry, because he was a kind of patriotic American. Uncle Sam doesn't do this. So the Defense Department guy comes back with pictures and stuff, including one of Alex Houston, which was so grotesque and so overwhelmingly proving the point that he got the next plane home, and he found a guy that he knew from his work before in the intelligence area, who just retired. And he said, "Tell me this is not true." And the guy said, "It is true. Uncle Sam ain't what you think it is." And he said, "By the way, those two people with Houston, the woman and the girl, they're mind-controlled slaves in this project." Kathy O'Brien, Kelly O'Brien. So it was then about 8, I think. And so Phillips said, "How do I spread it?" He said, "You don't know what you can do." Anyway, he did it. He got them out. Because he was doing this business deal with Houston, he did something to get Houston out of the way and sprung them. Houston was the handler. They had handlers that make sure they're in the right place and keep them traumatized. They were on the run for a year in Alaska and other places. And in that year, Kathy O'Brien's mind was healed. And the compartments were broken down. And they have to be done immensely carefully. Otherwise you can scramble people. Today, Kathy O'Brien is one of the most intelligent, balanced, loving people I've ever met, which is stunning in itself. Not only that, she's remembered everything in photographic detail. For this reason, it is an accepted fact that the mind will photographically remember anything that surrounds trauma. It might shut it out, but if the compartments are broken down, it's in there big time. She can remember patterns, decor, and patterns in carpets, and curtains in the Pentagon and the White House in rooms that the public never see. And details about them, which only she could know. So she's now talking about this, and more people are beginning to come out and speak about it. And what's emerging is a stunning tale of what's been happening to children, and what is happening to children to this very day. There's a guy down in Oregon called Fritz Springmeier, who's done some excellent research into this also. He's produced a very thick book, which actually uses hardly any of Kathy O'Brien's material. It all comes from his own research. And it's called How to Create an Undetectable Illuminati Mind-Controlled Slave, and the techniques they use. So why did they do it? First of all, to satisfy the sexual desires of very famous politicians. To be used in satanic rituals. Kathy O'Brien was used in many of those. Not least down at a place called Bohemian Grove, and you've heard that. That's where the point that the elite of the world meet in the forest, put their headdresses on and stuff like that. Very strange. People run the world. Secondly, they're used to sexually compromise other politicians. I was in New Zealand, by talking to someone who didn't even know I was researching any of this. He was an American who's just moved there. We got talking about things that Bush was involved in. And he said, "Do you know about Operation Brownstone?" Never heard of that. So he said, "Well, that was during the Bush presidency. They had a big brownstone building in Virginia, and they used to take politicians that he needed to go with him to do certain things about, but he wasn't sure if they would, and he'd get them into, because what they do is they identify any weakness that anybody has, and they get them on it. So if you've got a weakness sexually, they will provide your sexual weakness, and then they'll film the whole thing, and then you know it's filmed, and it's amazing how you go along with the story, no problem after that." One of the people that Kathy O'Brien sexually compromised was Bill Clinton in her mind-controlled state, and also King Fahd of Saudi Arabia, and also a guy called Dela Madrid, who was then president of Mexico. They also used them, and this is going back to problem, reaction, solution. They used them to assassinate people. How many times do we have, what do they describe it? Lone nutter, no conspiracy, when someone's taken out. People, like, they take John Lennon out. They say, "Oh, no, it wasn't the CIA or anything like that. The guy was obsessed with John Lennon." Oh, really? The guy, Sirhan, who murdered, or is alleged to have murdered Bobby Kennedy in 1968, there's a very good chance he didn't actually pull the trigger, someone else did, but he had a gun in his hand, so they got him for it. He had just finished, and the truth documents, he just finished a mind expanding course with the Rosicrucian organization just before he picks up a gun and does all that. And if you read, as I documented in the book, if you read his psychiatric report, which I got in some obscure magazine in a university by coincidence, he was obviously a mind-controlled guy. And what else do they do? They use these guys to go crazy with guns in Dunblane, Port Arthur, Tasmania, and other parts of the world. And they say, something must be done. We must take guns out of the general population. These people are mind-controlled slaves. When you look at the mental profiles and the backgrounds to these people, I live in Wiltshire in England, where a lot of these crop circles are, around Avebury and Stonehenge and places like that, they're called. Just down the road from there is a place called Hungerford. A few years ago, some guy who was obsessed with guns and stuff goes crazy and starts shooting people in Hungerford. He killed about 13 people or something. Now, he had a mental, and then he killed himself. In Dunblane, a guy with exactly the same mental profile goes crazy with a gun in a school gymnasium. They both had gun licenses when people around them were pointing out to the police these were the last people that should have guns, but nothing was ever done about it. When I was in Australia, I find that Martin Bryant, the guy who went crazy in Port Arthur with a gun, not long after Dunblane, he was actually shooting and killing his neighbour's domestic pets with his guns and taking pot shots at people in the weeks before he went crazy with a gun. And the police are coming up because obviously the neighbours have gone stripped this of the phone, and they basically told him not to do it again and gone off and left him with the guns. When the shooting started in Port Arthur, it was very close to a police station. Obviously, they called a police station. The police arrived an hour later. By September, purely as a result of that, it will be illegal to have a weapon in Australian society. By September, Australia will be completely disarmed. I personally wouldn't pull a trigger to save my life. I'm not into that at all. But these characters know that many people would, and they want that out of the way. So the control becomes absolute. The police have the guns, the military have the guns, and there's nothing to reply from the population. And as I understand it now, we're now in the fourth generation of this. And they're now getting these multiple personality disordered people to multiple personality personality disorder the next generation. The control are now controlling the next generation of control. And I have to say, because I think it's important, that some of the people who claim to be New Age gods and New Age channelers of this, that, and the other, multiple personality control people, and what they are channeling is programmed into. And I'd say this, just my view, for anyone in what we call the New Age. If anyone is going around saying, I'm channeling this or I'm channeling that, and it has to do with handing over large amounts of money, or it has to do with you must believe this and pressure to be obedient to that, and consequences if you don't. And I've just come across something exactly like that down just south of Seattle in the last few days. And the alarm bell should go. Because if people are beginning to open up, are beginning to go beyond the sheep mentality, these people that wish to control en masse are not going to walk away from that. They're going to want to divert the people who are waking up into another cul-de-sac. And people like this are used to do that. Just my view, I think there's a lot of, or some, New Age big names and UFO big names that aren't actually what they seem. And I don't think, myself, they actually know what the situation is, because if they're in this state, there's no way they'll know. So when events happen, this is another thing I think to keep in mind. And when Kathy O'Brien and Mark Phillips come along in April, I think they've got a session there where they'll be able to take loads and loads of questions and go into it in a lot more detail than I've been able to. It's certainly a very big thing and a very big element in this. The mind-controlled person, the mind-controlled robot, in short. Okay, we'll take some questions now. About anything or whatever. Yeah. How do I feel about the Iron Mountain report? That's a very interesting question, which takes us into two areas, really, particularly. The question was about something called the report from Iron Mountain. It's something I go into in detail in And the Truth Shall Set You Free. For anyone who's not come across it, during the 60s, from about 63, 62 maybe, across to when it reported in about 66, a group of, I think it was 15 experts in various fields were brought together by this hidden hand under the auspices of the United States government to produce a report on how to control the population and centralize power without further recourse to wars, which is how it's been done in the past. And it was called the Report from Iron Mountain because, as I understand it, Iron Mountain is an underground facility in New York State, and they met there for the first and last meeting, since it got that name. It appears that one of the number leaked the report to a friend who leaked it more widely. And what's interesting, when you look back, it was reported in 66, is two of the recommendations in that report for centralizing power and controlling the population. One, a global threat to the environment. That reported in 66. In 1968 came something called the Club of Rome, which is linked into the Bilderberg Trilateral Commission Council on Foreign Relations Network, and was set up by the same people that set them up. The Rockefellers and what have you, Rothschilds, people like that, towards the top of the pyramid, though not at the top of the pyramid. And if you look at what the Club of Rome did and its reports and stuff like that, it really started the environmental movement totally. Now, like I say, well, was said earlier, I was involved in the British Green Party as the national spokesman for a few years before I realised that while it spoke a good story, spoke a better story, it actually worked like all the others. At which point I said, thank you, I'm on. But I was involved in environmental campaigning during the 80s. And it's not that there isn't an environmental problem. And it's not that there isn't something to be addressed. The question is, as I document in the book, why is it that all the major global environmental reports saying there's an environmental problem, something must be done, have been funded by the same people who are dismantling the world's ecology? Who was the first head of the United Nations Environment Agency? Maurice Strong, Canadian oil millionaire, as I understand it, very, very close to the Rockefellers. Who was the head of the 1992 Earth Summit in Brazil? Maurice Strong. Who was the guy who was the real compiler of something called Our Common Future, which got the name of the Brundtland Report because it was fronted up by Gro Harlem Brundtland, the Prime Minister of Norway, but it was actually written by a guy called Jim McNeill, another Canadian who is a very close associate of Maurice Strong. Global 2000 Report to the President was written and compiled by people like Cyrus Vance, the Tri-African Mission Council on Foreign Relations. And what have been the solutions to this environmental problem? More and more transnational laws that are overpowering national law. In Europe now, big time. And yet, the people who are putting these reports forward and funding them are the same people that are suppressing technology that would remove the need to use fossil fuels and poison the planet. They have that technology already. They just won't let us have it because it suits the way things are. So it's not, I hear, again, black and white, some of the Christian Patriot movement, they do a fantastic job incidentally down in America getting three-dimensional information out. But they say things like, all environmentalists are communists. I used to be an environmentalist. I still am an environmentalist. I've never met a communist environmentalist. But again, it's that. There is nothing more manipulatable than genuineness that ain't streetwise. And so you've got the few at the top of the environmental movement who are manipulating the genuine people, not communists, below them, by creating the problem and then urging them to demand the solution. And what was the next thing in the report from Iron Mountain under a threat to the global environment? 1966, this was a threat from an extraterrestrial civilization, which is what I think is now being wound up to believe. Because one of the key areas of our lives which this global elite control absolutely is Hollywood. Control it completely. It has been one of their greatest forms of global conditioning. If you ask most people around the world, I guess, for a certain version of a historical event, the chances are they'll give you a Hollywood version. Hollywood's rewritten history, isn't it? Now, I had my intelligence insulted last autumn when I had nothing better to do, and I trotted into a cinema and I watched Independence Day. Have you seen it? First of all, who made it? 20th Century Fox. Who owns that? Rupert Murdoch. Who owns it? They do. And you've got all these different programs now starting to appear. They are in Canada, but they certainly are elsewhere, which are creating fear-based reactions to extraterrestrials. I can see a scenario, certainly a possible one, whereby we are sold the idea of some extraterrestrial invasion. I can hear the announcements now. Yes, we have to admit that there has been a holding back, not a cover-up, a holding back of information about our knowledge of extraterrestrials' activity because we didn't want to cause a global panic. But we have now reached the stage where the situation is so dire that we have to tell you that we believe there is a possibility of an invasion by an extraterrestrial civilization. And of course, at this grave moment in the history of planet Earth, we call for a collecting together, fusing together of military resources to meet this threat and a coming together of political resources to organize our response to this. Well done. Well done. Thank you very much. And when you see, it might sound kind of crazy, but when you see what happened in 1938 when Orson Welles was claiming to be broadcasting from the scene of a Martian landing, when he was broadcasting from a radio studio with special effects, all hell broke loose and the face was supposed to be what wasn't. The manipulative possibilities of this whole scenario are enormous, especially when you have technology which is beyond anything we see like the space shuttle, and therefore they can fly these things around and you give it, well, it must be extraterrestrial because there's nothing like that on Earth. Who says? I was talking to a guy called David Adair, who's now starting to speak out. I've still got, but he's saying some very interesting things. Not least about one piece of technology they have, which they tell us about, and that's the ability to make craft completely invisible. Not just radar invisible, but completely invisible. And he said they've had it for some time. It's very straightforward. I mean, he's a technological genius, He's making rockets as a kid, the type. And he said what they do is we see things three-dimensionally because they reflect light back. So that we've developed a technique that bends light around an object so it reflects nothing back. So three-dimensionally you can't see it, just be manifested, you can't see it. And he said we've developed suits that can do the same for a human being. Isn't that right? Yes, it is. And he was talking down at this whole Life Expo in Seattle, just knocking around the technology that exists that we don't know about. It's absolutely incredible. But when you've got that, we don't know it, then it's fantastic. I mean, what do people say? They have these horrendous things done to animals in fields. They say, look, whatever was done to that animal couldn't have been humans. We don't have that technology. No, we don't know we've got that technology. I mean, are we still naive enough to think that we are allowed to see state-of-the-art technological development at the moment they reach it? Of course not. Knowledge, ignorance equals control. So I don't have a problem with extraterrestrial life. I think the idea that when you look at the sky, that we're the only planet that has evolved anything like life is off the wall, from my perspective. I have no problem with the fact that there's quite possibly extraterrestrial activity going on at this time of some kind. And I actually believe myself that what we call the missing link in development and evolution of the human body, when there was a big jump and no apparent reason for it, was extraterrestrial intervention. So I had no problem with any of that. But it is a manipulator's dream also, and I think it is being to a very large extent. And again, the question keeps coming back, who benefits? And if who benefits is an excuse to centralize power, I think it's time for the alarm bells to ring. Take another one. Yeah. Right. Well, I think myself at this time, although that's just my view, that if anyone is claiming to name the people here right at the peak, I think they're very, very unique researchers and or maybe deluding themselves. Certainly you can name some people who are visible if you do the research within this. The House of Rockefeller, the House of Rothschild, and others. And like I said, I think earlier, the key is the bloodlines. For some reason, they're immensely keen to maintain the bloodline. Now, as these people, the last thing they are is stupid. Spiritual desert, because they close the heart chakra down. That's what they actually do to their kids, the Illuminati families. They close their heart chakras down, and they use techniques to develop their intellect. So by the time the baton's handed over to the next generation, you've got people who have been brought up to be very intellectually developed, very in the head, but the heart chakra is shut down, so they've lost touch with their multidimensional self and who they really are, pure love. And so you've got the mad professor syndrome, where someone who is intellectually almost completely in the head will do horrendous experiments on live animals, but whereas if they were in the heart as well as the head, the heart would say, excuse me, that may be possible, it might even on one level be interesting, but it's totally unacceptable. And so when the head is in the driving seat and the heart is in the trunk, then you've got a very imbalanced situation, very imbalanced behavior, very imbalanced perception, but the last thing they are is intellectually stupid. As Kathy O'Brien says about Bush, he may be a spiritual desert, but he is an intellectual genius. So, up there somewhere, you can start naming some of these people, and they're kind of bloodlines. And I did a lot of research in Australia. I came across some stuff there. It's funny, you know, you find out more about your own country when you're in another one. Have you noticed that? Because they shut the doors on information about it when you're in the country. Outside, you pick up more. And there's certainly, you can chart bloodlines involved here back through sort of Europe, as Europe developed, back through to ancient Israel, the lost tribes of Israel, into Egypt, into Babylon, and I think, although this is speculation obviously, back through to what we call Atlantis and whatever was before then. And it could well be, because they talk about apparently the forces in the blood, it could well be that the end of this bloodline that's there at the beginning may quite well have been, I don't know, it's possible, an extraterrestrial civilization of some kind, which has since helped to manipulate these bloodlines in their position of power and takeover. Anyway, it's all speculation that's going to come out, because everything's going to come out in the next few years, I think. At the top there, beyond the Rothschilds, beyond the Rockefellers, because I met someone in Australia who is involved in films, and he's a guy I trust, he's a feet on the ground guy. He's done years and decades of research into this. And he's got a friend who at one time was sort of here somewhere, who spent time with the Rothschilds in Paris, in France. And he said two things from his experiences. He said, one, I felt that I was in the presence of evil. And two, they are terrified of something and someone. Now, I've heard this from many, many sources, because while this uses fear on the population, it uses fear on itself. The higher you go, the more severe are the penalties for not going along with it, because you get, the higher you go, immense material privileges. And if you don't do the business, then things are done. And there was a Rothschild in his 40s who was murdered in Paris last year at very, very strange circumstances. The papers immediately said it was a heart attack, and they wished to write it off like that, until the hostel staff pointed out that he had a thing around his neck tied to the towel rail at the time, which was not much of a heart attack. And again, this guy in Australia, whose friend has been very close to the Rothschilds, he said what he heard, and it makes sense to me, although I have no proof of this at all, to make that clear, that he heard from a number of sources that there were some within the English Rothschilds, particularly along the younger generation, who wanted the hell out of this. They wanted out of this. They didn't want any part of it. They didn't want the baton, thank you very much. They wanted to get on with their lives. And this guy was one of them. And that was could well have been a sign to anyone else that wanted to get out, that you don't get out. You accept it going in. The only way out is into another dimension. At the top there, I think, at the top, are people interacting with either extraterrestrials or certainly a malevolent consciousness. A malevolent consciousness which has been given many names and is actually, whether it takes an extraterrestrial expression as we call it or not, has actually been the common theme through history of manipulating planet Earth in no human history going back to Atlantis and before. This has been the common theme. Obviously, people in physical embodiment go in and out, but this consciousness for me has been the common theme. And it's taken many names. One of them that's been given to it is Satan. It's the new balanced consciousness. And it's very clear that at this level, and a few levels below that, they are knowingly interacting with this consciousness in satanic ritual. I heard a story about a very famous, in Australia, a very famous politician who was found by policemen in a satanic situation. And when he was arrested and taken to the police station, he had his one call, and when he made that call, the next call to the police station was the police commissioner who said this guy's going to be let go. And the policemen were moved to other duties and have kept their mouths shut ever since. In terms of repeating what they told somebody I know. So they're knowingly interacting. And I think at the very peak, you're looking at people who have tremendous intellectual understanding of how to manipulate consciousness, energies, how to do things like mind control, manipulate, and things like that in certain African tribes have been called voodoo, the evil eye. They can actually psychically attack people in a very powerful way. And it seems to me, kind of putting all the different evidence and views together, that is what a lot of these people here are terrified of, the power they have to malevolently use this knowledge. And I don't think those people are public people. I don't think that at the moment we can name them, but I think eventually we will, because the tide is turning and the veil is lifting on this stuff. But certainly there's about 13 families there at any one time. But the names of the families change. It's the 13 bloodlines that are the key and the offshoots of those bloodlines. So what happened, for instance, with the bloodlines, this is kind of interesting in relation to Canada, is that you have Britain, which has been a big centre of this, and then you have America, Canada, then you've got Australia here, New Zealand, and what have you, then you've got South Africa here. These bloodlines came out of Babylon, Egypt, and whatever was before, and eventually they make their way up here. They became the Celts, they became the Germans, they became the Danes and the Scandinavians, and they became the British. You can check. If you look at the British royal family, we don't have a British royal family. We have an international tribe. The royal families of Britain, Denmark, Sweden, cheers, bye, Spain, Holland, all of them are blood related. All of them. We've actually got, in Britain, a German royal family. Do you know the story? In 1917, the royal family of Britain's name was the House of, if I've got to pronounce it right, the House of Saxe-Coburg. German royal family. In 1917, the Germans and the British were knocking crap out of each other. They thought it'd be good PR to change it. So they changed it to Windsor. The name Mountbatten, because the royal family of Britain is now called Mountbatten Windsor because of Prince Philip, the name Mountbatten is merely the anglicised version of Battenberg. That's all it is. They changed Battenberg to Mountbatten. That's where that name comes from. The other German royal family. Now, so these bloodlines, I'm going to go into this in detail in my next book. You follow the bloodline, it went through the Irish, through the Scottish, and into the English bloodline. And then when the Europeans and stuff started coming out to Canada and America, the bloodline was exported also. I forget what the number is, but someone did some research. They wrote a book. I'm trying to get hold of it. Knowing the title would help, and I don't know it yet, but I know it's out there. But the presidents of the United States have actually come from about 4 bloodlines, all of them. We then go down to South Africa, because British get everywhere, the bloodline's exported. We go to Australia, the bloodline's exported. So is the secret society network and structure that was set up there. In 1776, when they signed the Declaration of Independence, so this has come from Freemason sources, 56 signatories, at least 50 were known Freemasons, only one was known not to be. Washington was a Freemason. And there's an amazing building in Washington, D.C. What's a pentagram? A pentagram looks like. It's five-pointed thing, isn't it? No, they say it's. I can never do that one. It's like they call it satanic symbol, right? You know the one, pentagram. You see it sometimes. Well, when I was in Washington last September, I heard this idea about the Washington, D.C. road plan, that it contained endless satanic symbols and stuff like that. And this guy came to me and he said, did I know about it? I said, I heard about it, I'd like more information. He came back the next day, it was a rally thing, with a photocopied copy of this very rare book, which had them all in. Extraordinary sight. And what you've got this pentagram thing pointing down. And in the street plan, these are all streets and roads going like that. And right on the bottom of this pentagram, it goes right to the White House. And if you take a line straight through the middle of this pentagram, which I wish I could remember how to do, I think it's called 16th Street. And about here, just on the edge of it, is an incredible building. It's the Supreme Headquarters, 33rd degree Scottish Rite of Freemasonry, and it's an Egyptian temple. Because that's where this goes back. This is where they get their inspiration from, the ancient world and the mystery schools and the knowledge passed on. You've got the pillars. You've got the depiction behind the pillars of the rising sun. The rising sun is the symbol of the Illuminati, the illuminated ones, the rising sun. And it's got sphinxes outside. And in the back, I had a look around the garden, through the fence. They've got a bust of George Washington, first Freemasonic president of the United States. So these bloodlines have actually been exported. And the same secret societies that have stitched up America and Canada and have stitched up Europe and Britain, they're the same ones that are stitching up Australia and New Zealand. Same names come up, same things. It's just what their hidden hand is. We've got time for one more. I think we've got time for one more. Yeah. Go ahead. So here we go. Yeah. Right. It's a good way to finish. What's the step that we can take? Well, first of all, I wouldn't dream of advising anyone what to do in terms of action, because I know exactly what is right for me. End of story. All of us know what is right for us and the contribution we have come to make in this period of time. What I feel we need to do as individuals is to access that knowledge, because we've shut it down, most people, for this reason. People talk about, and a lot of these kind of manipulative New Age groups and channelers and stuff, not that all of them are, I'm not saying that, but there are some we need to look at. They talk about the need to seek enlightenment and to find teachers of enlightenment. Enlightenment's never gone anywhere. Enlightenment is sharing the same space as ignorance. For me, what we need to do is to remove the barriers we throw up between enlightenment and ignorance. Enlightenment's not running away, so we have to find it. Enlightenment's in the same space that ignorance is occupying, saying, for goodness sake, listen to me. Here I am. And what I feel we do, and what I think this conditioning is, you never had much to eat today, did you? What I feel it is, here we are, symbolically, obviously it's sharing the same space, but symbolically like that, we're multidimensional beings going on into infinity. But what we do through Emotional manipulation and conditioning, like fear, guilt, I could never, bar mentalities, fear, we throw around us what I call an eggshell, a low vibrational eggshell, which shuts out who we really are, because we're terrified of who we really are, not least. This part, hence the name of this book that's just arrived in Canada today or yesterday, tomorrow. I call this part, I am me. Sorry, what am I doing? I'm getting tired. I call this part, oh my God, because it's terrified. And this part of us, I am me, I am free. This part of us wants to express uniqueness. It can see the nonsense of the limitations we impose upon ourselves and allow to be imposed upon ourselves. It wants to get in there. It talks through intuition. Oh my God is in the head. It's getting its inspiration this way. And it's at war with the intuition, because the intuition is coming from higher levels of consciousness, our own consciousness, not some external entity. So if we follow our intuition, what's the first thing that happens? Our intuition, multidimensional infinity, looks at the hassle-free zone and says, what a load of bloody crap, and it's out of it, isn't it? But oh my God's terrified of being here. Oh my God, what will my mother say? What will the neighbours say? Oh my God wants to be in the hassle-free zone because it feels more comfortable that way, because it's full of fear. And so we keep out enlightenment. And a lot of these New Age organizations that breed obedience and this is the only way in a creation as immensely diverse as we've got, no such thing as an only way. There's 5 billion only ways on planet Earth alone. We let go the fear of what other people think of us. We let go of all these conditionings that shut out who we really are. We get in touch with who we really are. At that point, that level of inspiration, you know exactly where you need to be and what your contribution is. Don't need anyone to tell us anymore. Don't need any teachers or gurus. It's coming from the source, our multidimensional infinity. And for me, the way to do that is to open this, the heart chakra. For me, what we are, people talk about possessing the soul. Impossible. The soul, from my perspective, is pure love on the highest vibration. We're out there vibrationally, we're over the horizon. One of the things that Kathy O'Brien and a number of the other people I've talked to have been through the same thing, have said, almost word for word, is no matter what they did to us, they could not get to our spiritual core. And the reason they couldn't do that, because the spiritual core, soul, is out of here vibrationally. No one in the three-dimensional world can possess a soul. Well, they can do, because what I feel soul does is project an aspect of itself into three-dimensional embodiment as part of the journey of evolution. The three-dimensional world is a tremendous vehicle for learning, and I think it can do the same to a number of aspects of itself at the same time. And you get the soulmate instant recognition, know you 2 minutes, know you all my life syndrome. What these guys can do, and this is what mind control and emotional manipulation is not possess the soul, it's pure love. They can isolate three-dimensional mind, if you like, the consciousness that's operating directly through the physical body from soul. And at that point, we become like a spaceman on the moon in a big spacesuit. At that point, the spaceman has got eyes and ears information telling him immediately about what's happening on the moon and around in three-dimensional. But he's also got mission control, big picture, feeding him guidance. Perfect combination. Someone comes along, either cuts or dramatically reduces the audibility of mission control. Within seconds and minutes, that spaceman's thinking, actions, and behavior will increasingly, dramatically change compared to what it would have been had mission control stayed in powerful contact. Because now, the inspiration and the vision is very narrow, three-dimensional information only. And that's what I feel happens when we come into embodiment. We lose contact with who we are, soul. That is pure love. The heart chakra is from where we project pure love. So, when our heart chakra is open and we are living examples of unconditional love, the heart chakra is open, our energy field, the projected consciousness is vibrating within the frequency range of pure love. It's in contact vibrationally with soul, mission control. As our heart chakra shuts down, and nothing does that more than fear, guilt, resentment, we us vibrationally from pure love. We delink vibrationally from that range, that frequency range, and we become almost self-contained consciousness. And this is why the more I research this, and the more I look at some of these initiation ceremonies at the highest level of this network, they are very clearly designed to shut their heart chakras down, as the methods they use on their children are. So they shut them out from pure love. They develop the head intellect. And this is why they do things, because they're intellectually possible. And they do them because they live in the man. Which is why the only way out of here is to reverse the way we got in here. So look George Bush in the face and say, I'm not standing for what you're doing because of what you're doing and all this stuff. It's a civilized society, but I love you because you're part of me. These guys don't need hatred. They don't need aggression to put it. Last thing they want to need love. That's what they're missing. That's why they do it. So we're going to go home, and the only way we can go home by opening our hearts and going home vibrationally, by reconnecting with who we really are. We get out of here. Hello, alone. This is why throughout all these Asian texts and stuff, there's common themes. And one common theme is the only way forward, the only way out of here, the only way to enlightenment is by love, unconditional love for all things, for all time, including ourselves. Because enlightenment is pure love. That takes us to pure love. That takes us to enlightenment without any help from anyone. It's just a choice. Thank you very much.